Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Sunday, April 13th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. Right out of the gate, I want to point something out that, okay, fine, I guess it's time for us to do away with the joke of the concise point in the beginning of the show. If anybody out there is interested in trying to put together a new opening for TLAV or want to work with me to do some background, like something you want to make for TLAV, reach out to me, let me know, or let somebody in the chat know. I will probably be redoing that just because I want to get something new in regard to the daily wrap up. But the ongoing joke for the longest time has been when I first started the daily wrap up, it was, probably about 10, 15 minutes long. And over time continued to get longer and more in depth and more information. And the point is, if you really understand the definition or one of the uses of the word, it's about lots of information in a shorter period of time. So if I look at what we're doing, to make it work anyway, including what I think is multiple days of information in a hours long show, I still think it technically applies. But anyway, the joke was to keep it going because people wanted me to shorten the show, which I'll never do. Well, kind of. If you're out there and interested in wanting to do that, or like I pointed out before, music videos for some of the songs we have out there, just reach out to somebody in the community, let me know, because I would like to do that. But in general, to start today, I think where the show is going to be focused around is I put aside the deportation conversation until tomorrow. We'll be doing a show tomorrow, and I want to discuss. I'd love to get into it today, but it was going to just be far too long for the show. Some very important follow-ups on specifically in regard to Khalil, who, both actually, Mohammed Khalil and Garcia. Just to quickly note, Donald Trump's administration has now followed up yet again, despite the Supreme Court ruling, despite him saying he would abide by what they said, and are just literally ignoring the direction of the Supreme Court in regard to him being required, the administration being required to bring him back to the United States. Just simply saying, hey, that's up to Bukele in El Salvador. The whole thing is so insulting. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. Over and over and over. But we'll come back to that. We're also going to talk about some more around that larger conversation that I think is very, very relevant. Today, a pretty good focus on foreign policy and only a few parts that overlap with Israel. It's important to highlight where that makes sense or where it matters. But today, it's more so about Donald Trump's administration, or as you understand it, if you're paying attention to the show, simply just the U.S. government, no different from the last person put in that position. And what this administration is doing, which also, in my opinion, is really no different than we've seen, other than a sort of an increase in the intensity. And there's a lot of reasons that might happen. We've seen that in the past. I tend to think it's about building agendas that are coming to a head because people are really not falling for things like they used to. And that we've seen that over the years as well. So this may not even be some kind of a new point in the history of this country. I tend to think it is for a lot of reasons, just because of where we're at technologically and other things. Either way, it's important to highlight how this continues to fluctuate. And I think, as I've continued to say for a while now, that the majority of people out there, and that could mean 51%, that's still the majority, I think it's more than that, are very much aware of almost all the things we're talking about on the show. Doesn't mean they decide to stop supporting one side or the other. Doesn't mean they decide to stop voting, or that they, whatever I would argue that probably should translate to, but nonetheless, just recognize how many people see this. Now, I recently went out, now I forgot to post about this. I have an image that I'm going to post maybe today or tomorrow when I get to it. I went last night to go watch Spiderland with a Y. Really fantastic people, amazing band. At now they say I shouldn't have done this before I had it in front of me, but it's because I wanted to shout this group out as well. And I forgot the paper that I grabbed from them, but I believe it's Jolene Hardware. An amazing location, amazing people running it, and really about trying to make this community hub. The point was that I got to meet with them, and for the second time, they were at the carnival as well for Spiderland. And a Faithless Town was there, and a few other people that you might know in the background. We just, after the show, had a really good conversation, and with a couple of others that were at the carnival as well. And the conversation a lot of times does circulate around this kind of point. And I just keep finding more and more evidence that even in the view of a lot of other people, but in some partisan included, that they see it as well, that everywhere they look, even talking to people on the streets right now, they may not be in the alignment with what we might think is the reality, or what might be the kind of follow-up to what we're seeing, but they recognize something's wrong. And that's why we're getting these narratives about why but RFK's blackmailed, and maybe that's the case. But they're manufacturing narratives to sort of make this make sense with what they hope the reality still is. Now, that, as much as it's frustrating, is an indication of the positive change happening and people just trying to make sense of it in ways that make sense to them, or in some cases dishonestly. But I just really want to drive that home, that every moment I'm seeing more examples, more evidence that we're seeing this kind of continually minimized minority of screaming partisans that are acting like everything is under their control. And the reality is people are slipping away from it. So just keep that in mind. Now, overall, again, like I said, the points we're going to get into, I'm going to start with some two-party illusion stuff that I think is relevant, as always, to how this is being played and also to what I just said and how clear that is. But I'm going to make sure we highlight something we've been following along in regard to DOGE and the spending and the misrepresentations around the whole thing that I think are very important to highlight, kind of in conjunction with everything that the partisan manipulations, but more so about the idea of how this is projecting or adding to the larger agenda that I see as nonpartisan, whether that's technocracy, or really in my mind, that's what we're talking about. But this, however you see that, this sort of growing technocratic control structure that very much dovetails or is completely overlapped with globalism, with Zionism. That's not my opinion, guys. These are right in front of you. And my point is about the spending and what's really going on there. What money and how things are changing and things, money's moving around or really not actually being reduced, and claims of that. And so what's really happening, as well as the point that I'm going to highlight to start again, that I wanted to reiterate, to bring to mind, is the point about these ethics pledges. I told you back then that if we didn't get any pushback on that from any of the sides, I think that says something much more alarming than we realize. But we'll come to that in a second. And we're going to be going over the points around DOGE as well as the spending and foreign policy. But we're going to make a point about the Real ID yet again, even though we just talked about it, because it's interesting coming off that conversation to see how the partisan field is sort of responding to this. And I almost put it, I forget what I ended up with the title. Yeah, so I just put the Real ID two-step. I wanted to make it about specifically MAGA or the right side and the way they're responding to this. And if you don't understand what the two-step point means, it's sort of like, it's like a, what do they call it? There's another term for it, but essentially having, an authority that hands down information and then having like a chosen class that sort of then dictates that down to the average people. That is the mainstream alternative media. That is the corporate media. And I mean, you could even argue from another point that is what independent media is doing in general. But the difference is that we're not just handing down what we're given, in my opinion. The ones that are honest in this field, we're being critical, even of those we might support, as we should be. So the two-step point is about the way that the information around Real ID is strikingly obvious. It's been going on since after 9/11, Patriot Act. This is not new. And it's interesting to see the way that these people are grappling with this story and acting like it's completely disconnected from the digital ID point. Now, I'm not even arguing that this is immediately going to be digital ID. My point is that is what this represents. And it's not my opinion. It's in the documentation. And that's why the two-step point is so interesting, that people are going, that's not what, X, Y, and Z said, and then just yelling you down for being wrong or you're not educated on the topic. And I'm like, here's the document. It says it right there. It's just very strange. And so I mean, I should stop saying strange, seeing as how it's very common today, but it's interesting. And I don't understand how people could fall into that, but it's clearly happening. And the digital continuation from that conversation, and yet again, following up and showing you things that I've shown you more than once, that passports and birth certificates, they've already driven this and are trying to make them digital. This was well before this. So the argument that, though you still have those choices, you do for now, but they're already working on removing those, which has always been my point around this. For those that actually follow along with these shows and, continue to learn from the information, as opposed to just kind of reactionary to what's being said by the corporate mainstream alternative media. And of course, the overlap with that, which is a great point made by Jason Bassler with the Mexico discussion. And if you haven't seen that, Trump has now authorized U.S. military to take control of land in the U.S.-Mexico border area. And that includes land that is part of the United States, guys. There's no way around that. So with this game they play where this is sort of not a violation of Posse Comitatus, for example, because of an executive order, that's the broken nature of the system today. My opinion is that it all falls back on the reality of whether it is repugnant to the Constitution or not. And the idea in general that the government can even own or occupy land, in my opinion, is a wild violation of the Constitution. But we're so far from that. The point is to recognize that if anybody else was doing that, especially with an L by their name, what would be happening. But we're also going to get into an Ecuador point that I thought was very relevant to this conversation. And it also overlaps with the immigration conversation. which I'll point out there, and I might overlap it tomorrow with the follow-up on that, but it's just the same old story. It's the U.S. government deciding to do what they would cry foul about for anybody else, maybe not Israel, and doing so because of national security. And actually, it's the same conversation of the Panama Canal, which we're also going to talk about. That they, basically that everything China's doing is a problem because it's our national security is at risk. But everything China was doing, they claim, is exactly what the U.S. is doing instead. So it's only bad when they do it. And on top of that, deploying military personnel, having new bases put in, and Panama doesn't seem to want that. And China wasn't doing that. China didn't have military deployed in the ground, at least as we could verify, which I double-checked yet again today. But we'll go through all of that today. And just, again, hopefully have an objective, open mind to this and not fall into partisan traps, because they are laid everywhere. Now, one of those points is something that we've talked about before, and I've recently mentioned. This is somebody, Bren Circus reiterated this again, because somebody else had pointed this out to me. It's interesting how often right now, from not just the COVID-19 time, but just about everything, because a lot of people are kind of newly awakened to even like the political conversation in a real sense, because of how like gamified it's become. It's like a cartoon today. And so my point is that people are aware of these things that are, generally common knowledge for anybody that was even barely paying attention to just, I guess just outside the mainstream conversation. Not even like getting deep and stuff, like just barely outside of that. People that were screaming about things that were, even large influencers that were still partisan. We're talking about things like the Wuhan military games in 2020. And so what we're getting is a lot of this repackaging of information as if it's breaking, and using that to kind of drag people into a certain position or capture minds for a very clear reason. And it's just very strange. Now, and it's not, the point is always to make that knowing about this Wuhan military games overlap is clearly important. But if it's used to get you to see half the story, which then effectively makes you miss the bigger picture, then it's counterintuitive. Knowing it is actually hurting you in a way. And that's how this is played. Always. It's always a big, and for me, it's always the same answer for the most part, that if you look at it from a partisan lens, you'll never solve the problem, because it is never one half of the government. As the stupidest thing. What's crazy is that is like trying to, it's like trying to teach someone a language in 30 seconds. Like it's that are trapped in it, in partisanship. Because it's so frustrating, because they've been built around this idea that it is that side that is the problem. But if you just take a second and take any other conversation outside of the tribal partisanship or politics and argue that a power structure is somehow only, or just like the point about the deep state, that we're told this is like a surreptitious thing that is, infiltrating and taking control. And we're told that they've only really gone after the one side, despite how clearly compromised and criminal everyone in politics seems to be. It just seems naive at the very least. At least ask yourself whether it could be over. But that's where the rhino conversation comes in. No, they're on the right, but they're the bad guys. Whatever makes it all make sense. The point is, it's just your government. And if you're objective about it and you actually look at the precedents and you look at the linear objectives that have never stopped, it's just your government. And they're all doing it. But at this point, back to the limited hangouts. Brendan Circus says the Wuhan military games occurred in October 2019, but if you follow TLAV, you didn't need to see this government memo to know that. Now, this is important because, and I'll play the clip and then I'll go over the kind of a brief, at least what I can remember off the top of my head about what we covered in this. And it's important because this was happening in 2020. This is the article we put, at least one of them, May 8th, 2020. The title was Gene-Edited Future Justified by COVID-19. Hey, look at that. We were right again. And France admits athletes infected at Wuhan military games. This was the follow-up. This wasn't even the first time we talked about this. This is just the one that I was able to grab really quickly. This was following up saying, yeah, France admits it. They did get sick. So let's play the clip. And this, again, is only part of their conversation, so keep that in mind as well. But this is the general gist of it.
Conspiracy theories about this being a man-made virus. Now, what's so crazy about what just got revealed about this Biden national security document about the Wuhan military games is that the origin start date for the Wuhan military games was October 18th, 2019. The tabletop exercise planning a bat-borne coronavirus from China that would widely be believed and needed to be stopped being believed as being a man-made virus was done the exact same day, down to the exact day as the Wuhan military games, where we now know, or at least the evidence from the Biden administration suggests is highly likely, was the very day of the outbreak. They planned the simulation the same day of the outbreak.
Just in case I forget it, that one little point right there that we now know, at least based on their thing, that that's the case. No, we don't need, see, this is pretending like this memo is the only reason we now know this, and we can't even confirm it because it's only in the memo. No, we already knew that. We already talked about this. We already broke this down. I mean, even the point about all of it. I mean, from admitting that there were people that were ill, the timing of when it started. I mean, these are all provable evidence points at this point. So what's the point of this? What is the point? I mean, look, you don't think Mike Pence knows that? He's around. He's immersed in the intelligence, and there's reasons to be very skeptical about the way he does this every time. Just ask yourself why that makes sense. I mean, there's only one real obvious answer. It's to control the way you look at things, to convince you that, one, that they're leading you in the right direction, and then usually that's, you know, whatever the analogy would fit right there, leading you into the ground, pulling the rug out. That's what tends to happen. Or at least that you're in this limited hangout situation where you don't see the full picture, where that's what you need in these moments. Like, so, I mean, you know, this could be just trying to get people to feel like you're being, you know, guided through the breaking information so you feel more comfortable with them. But it also makes me worried that this kind of stuff comes back up because maybe there's something about to happen. That's in no way meant to scare anybody. There's no reason, you know, other than the fact that they do these things all the time, to think that's what's coming around the corner. But just, you know, keep it in mind, being objective, question everything while considering all possibilities. I worry that when you have these kind of conversations, that there's a reason for that to be planted in your mind. And we have the bird flu thing rising. You know, as always, though, my point with this whole conversation, let's not do their job for them. Let's not jump at every shadow around every conversation of a bird flu, whatever else. Report it when it seems relevant, but don't do it because they point to it. You see what I'm saying? Because I think that's doing their job for them, to get other people hyped about it that might not know what we know, or, you know, that we believe we know.
That is just an astounding detail. And again, the simulation posited that the outbreak would occur in December, mid-December. December 18th is what they, December 15th through 18th is what they had in the simulation. That's exactly when the outbreak formally occurred for the pneumonia-like symptoms in Wuhan. It was December 12th to December 14th when
I guess we'll just leave out the very important conversation of the pneumonia-like symptoms or the ground glass opacity happening around Fort Detrick and the nursing homes before that. Or all the evidence from Canada and Taiwan and France, all of them telling you they had evidence of whatever this was before 2019. But, you know, all that doesn't matter because we're starting here in Biden's memo and they knew something and bad guy Democrats. That's what this is really about.
The initial one. So it's like they planned it all the way down to the date.
Yeah. You mean the Event 201 was basically predictive models showing you exactly what happened. And bombshell! Everybody everywhere covering this that gave any insight in this. Look at James Corbett's work, for example. Did a breakdown of this exact overlap of how what they did literally came to pass. So I just think this is strange. Not to belabor the point. That it's just very obvious what these are meant to do. And if you never heard this before and you look into, you're going to go, wow, that's crazy. But it's all been there. Controlled flows of information, creating certain identities that are the ones that seem to know everything, when the reality is, or like Alex was right kind of a narrative, even though you look back and go, he was also wrong quite a bit more than that. But, who cares that Bill Cooper called him a fraud, or that everybody that's ever left from David Knight to Greg Reese to the True Stream people to Richard Grove, all of them tell you that they lie and they manipulate and they don't check their sources. But, we're all crazy. The point is, this is how this stuff is supposed to go. To convince people that don't look further that these are the ones that are going to lead you in the right direction. And all they lead you in is to a wall, with half the information. And I said, this was roundly discussed, dissected, and debated back in 2020. Why are people falling for this mainstream alternative media repackaging of long discussed information? And I just, again, cited one of our shows where we talk about this in 2020. Now, the main thing to remember on this, and the few things I think are relevant to remember in this conversation. So we had that overlap in the United States first, where we had what they called a rare, or what was the word they used? A novel pneumonia or something like that was circulating inside the United States, or at least they claimed. Again, I'm not saying all of this is government narrative. So it's always worth considering that even that was a lie. But the point was, there was a reporting around Fort Detrick. I remember in the past, they even reported, I think it was one leak every 3 days for 7 years straight. I know it sounds ridiculous. We covered that like 11 times during COVID. It's from their own documentation, and that's a BSL-4 lab. biosecurity level 4, which means coronaviruses, Ebola, and they were having leaks. It's just insane. But don't forget, that's also that ties back to the anthrax conversation, and that was an entire psyop. Point is, in that area, right around that, after this was discussed, you had, or rather, looking back, we were then revealed that they had those leaks, and then a timeline after that, in the nursing homes, there was all the same thing, all the ground glass opacity. Remember, that was the thing they just dropped once that became the overlap. From that point forward, and this is the argument, that you could argue if you wanted to think of it this way, and again, considering that this is all some psyop in its own right to trick you about something is always important, but then you had the Wuhan military games, where the U.S. military went. And the point was, when they showed up, there's two important things. As France admitted, and we then verified on the show, and a lot of others did, there were people that were sick, and American military, but it wasn't just them, in these games. And of course, their argument was to kick it over to people in a market, which is consider for yourself, but the evidence was never really backed up in any sense. The point is that they were sick there before this. And interestingly enough, the American military performed wildly under what they ever, usually they're at the top of most of these fields. And you can look that up for yourself. We showed at the time. But this year, they were all pretty, they did pretty bad in comparatively to what they did before, like a very clear difference. And so the argument was, well, it seems like they were sick. And they seem to suffer more than the rest of everybody else. And so the argument became this was something that was either from Fort Detrick or something that was, put out or tested. Remember, the vaping overlap was very strange. So we considered whether that was something. And remember Alex Acosta, and all they wanted to talk about, or was it Alex, or basically all they wanted to talk about was the vaping conversation, and Trump was focused on it. Anyway, the point is, all these tangential points, is that then it possibly spread over to them, or maybe they did it on purpose. And then that's when it kicked off in China. And don't forget all the lies about people falling, and those were fake videos. So my point is, to just pluck out this one part and use it is very deceptive, in my opinion. Now, listen to their full conversation. There's more to what they say, but nonetheless, this is not new information. We don't need Biden's memo to tell us what we already knew and to basically couch it in one part of the conversation. So all of that applies to just about everything we're talking about in a partisan sense. I think that's important to consider. Now, I'll also include this, which I mentioned in the beginning. Different point. But to go over into something about the coming elections, I think this is fascinating and alarming at the same time. So don't forget this, guys. We talked about this many times before the election. Just to make sure we didn't miss this point, even though I reiterated it many times, this never happened. People like Bondi or Hegseth or Trump himself or Musk. Well, Musk is this weird special case where he apparently nothing applies to him, even though obviously it's the most relevant part of this, where he seems to have more power than anybody. Nonetheless, they didn't sign ethics pledges. Really, what they did is they undid something that Trump passed that Biden applied to, and then he removed himself from. On top of that, there was all these weird situations, remember, during the transition where they used their special buildings, they used their own servers, and there was evidence of all sorts of security problems. So if they never signed these ethics pledges, which they did not, remember the person involved with the administrative overlap said that means they could be working for a foreign government or being funded by them, and we would never know. Well, guess what? We don't need that. We already know Mary Adelson and plenty of others have put hundreds of millions of dollars in his pocket for things he's already allowed them to do, which are illegal. But just think about how wild that is. Democrats I think it was Elizabeth Warren was the only person who brought this up. And that's not to say you should trust Elizabeth Warren. Who knows why? Opportunism. I don't know. But the point is, ask yourself how it's possible that the deep state, what they want you to think, just the Democrats, have this very clear thing they could use to say he didn't sign ethics pledges. That means he's an illegal president. That means he's funded by Russia. They could have made any number of allegations, and they didn't say a peep. You know why? In my opinion, and things we can clearly prove, because Israel is the reason for that. That there's so much influence and so much alarming overlap, like JFK trying to make AIPAC register as a foreign agent, that kind of stuff that never happened. And from there forward, they've gained an incredible amount of influence in this country, to the point to where a lot of very intelligent and very, very prominent people are saying, we think Israel's controlling our policy. Not you hate Jewish people or a racist point or any kind of weird abstract connection, simply policy being dictated by a foreign government. The same argument made about China and Russia, but somehow it's racist when you do it about Israel. This has to be relevant. Now, to take it one step further, my opinion if you watch this show. I think we are literally watching. Let's see if I can grab that show or that episode, because I do think that's a good one to watch. Yeah. I think this is the one. as I titled this, the new Trump administration and the technocratic Zionist coup of the United States. Now, there's some of this is certainly my opinion, but there is so much evidence around this that it's painful that we can't have an honest conversation about it. And I mean, genuinely concerned about what's literally happening right now behind the scenes with no ethics pledges, with clear Zionist influence, we're literally, this government is carrying out their wars around the world in direct contradiction to what Trump promised all of his base. And we're acting like we don't see this. Anyway, I didn't mean to get into this deep, but I just wanted to make sure we saw that this never got brought up. And that's a very big deal when we don't understand who is influencing who, or rather when we do, and nobody cares to actually verify that they aren't, in a sense. I'll include this one as well. Now, that interestingly overlaps with another conversation that very well could be a troll. They're trolling you. They're trying to get you to react, which seems like it might make sense, except they're really doubling down. Now, what you get from this is the same thing we got from Panama, for example, or Greenland, where they said, oh, they're just trolling you stupid Democrats, even though we're not Democrats. And you fell for it. And then, oh, now it's happening. And now it was always the right thing. And you're stupid for saying it wasn't. It's like, well, so you're playing it both ways? That's very Israeli of you. The point is, Trump is going to run for a third term, says Steve Bannon, tells Bill Maher, who, by the way, jumping a little bit ahead, apparently is now a Trump supporter, or at least is the funny overlap we keep seeing, where it's always okay when these people you otherwise call pedophiles and dangerous deep state characters, when they suddenly side with you. And that's worth unity. We're all on the same side. Yay. And who cares about military tribunals for that? Oh, they're on our side now because they said so. That's why honest conservatives are like, hold on, that doesn't make any sense. It's the screamers that don't care about the reality. But this is real that he said this. First point, that Bannon said this, suggesting this was going to happen. Now here is before that, Trump says third term isn't, or rather, excuse me, this was March 30th. Make sure I didn't mix up the time. I thought I had them in chronological. Oh, cool. No, I did have it backwards. So this is April 12th. So first, Donald Trump on March 30th said, it's not a joke. Third term isn't a joke, despite the term limit. Now, I'm not going to go too deep on it because, it's hasn't come to pass. It's a long way down the line. It could just be to kind of spin people out, get you distracted with other conversations. But my point is that even if it's a joke, as we keep seeing in the world, these things have very real consequences, more so foreign policy points. But it's a little bit insane when you think about it, and they're doubling down. Where was it? Oh, I might have actually closed something. There's been multiple examples of this. My point was, there was 3, where this has been floated, it's been discussed. Trump says it's not a joke. Now Bannon steps up recently and says, this was yesterday, and says, no, he's going to run for a third term. So maybe Bannon's lying. But just think about how weird this is and all these weird changes and literally some of the most violently and legitimately violently, I meant that more so like aggressively, but even violently in the real sense, unconstitutional things that we've ever, in the context of actions that will create precedent, even unconstitutionally, that will change this country forever. And of course, it's starting with the people that they've convinced you should hate. Doesn't really, in principle, it's no different than you. That's the reality. And again, to state the obvious reality that we should all know in elementary school, but seems to argue about it today, that yes, even illegal immigrants have constitutional rights. That is the reality. Ask Ron Paul, ask Judge Napolitano, ask Scalia, ask anybody. But of course, it's only a Democrat thing when they want to box themselves out to one side. It is the reality, guys. That is the reality of inalienable, constitutional, God-given rights. And of course, obviously, green card visa holders, but Americans, the point is, principally, it's the same difference. So as they keep doing this, we'll get into more tomorrow again. It's driving us in a direction that is destroying this country. And this very well could be another step in that. Worth considering. Now, just in case you don't know, just 2 things. Let's just ask Grok, of course, and see what they have to say. No, Donald Trump cannot legally run for a third term. It says the 22nd Amendment, to the United States Constitution limits presidential terms. You should know this. This seems like basic knowledge to me. Whether consecutive or non-consecutive. The only reason I'm even pointing at this right now is because I'm seeing people talk online, just like about constitutional rights, who don't know what they're talking about, who are arguing, well, as long as it's not consecutive, it's okay. No, it's not. It's that, and of course, they could try to change that, but here's the point. That would be repugnant to the Constitution. It's like trying to pass legislation that says you can't own a gun. Well, they could pass that legislation and they probably would all vote for it. It doesn't change the fact that by the reality of inherent rights and the Supreme Court ruling, Mayberry versus Madison, and understanding what the Constitution means, If it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. That is the reality. So if they tried to pass something that said this, it wouldn't matter. It would be unconstitutional. So too with the rest of it, like passing a bill that says you can't have free speech. It's not the reality of how this works. Those are not written down things they've given you. It's an outline of inherent rights, whether they ever wrote it down. That's the reality. It says Trump served one term already and is currently serving a second. So he is constitutionally barred from running again. That is the reality. And just in case, here's the 22nd Amendment. No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. And no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of the president more than once. All that means is, should you, like a JFK situation, if somebody's removed or killed and the vice president steps in, if you end up serving more than 2 years, then you can only run and get elected one more time. If you end up serving less than 2 years in that circumstance, then you could run for 2 more terms. The argument is that somebody could manipulate that situation to allow a circumstance where somebody could get more than 2 terms. So it's well thought out. The bottom line is that there's no error in this conversation. And even if they try to change it, that would be unconstitutional. Now, even that was giving it too much time, because for all we know, this could be a head fake. What's funny about it, as always, is that when we even talk about it, you get the comments, oh, you're falling for the troll. And then the things tend to happen. They tend to keep happening. So it's worth noting before we get there. Now, in regard to the two-party illusion discussion, and this is my opinion, why I think this is relevant, even though some of it's not truly relevant to the larger picture, but to what we were just talking about, this is why people don't see these things, or why people fall for these things, or why people in the partisanship seem to kind of, like I said today, partisanship rots the brain. I genuinely believe that. It is a contradiction. Like if you fall into these tribalist positions, you will end up in a position where you will choose that instead of what's right, what is accurate, what is true. And not everybody. Clearly, there's a lot of honest people out there that side on their principles, thank God. But right now, that's a lot of people on the partisan side that will overlook the facts in lieu of fighting for their side. We all know that exists. So as the Patriot Voice says, the Great Awakening has turned into the Great Deception at warp speed. Yep. And I mean, I was going to go into exact what I would say to that, but I don't need to, because David Icke said exactly what I would say. It was always going to. Trump is a fraud. Musk is a fraud. Thiel is a fraud. The quote cabinet are frauds. The MAGA media are frauds, and he means the mainstream alternative media. And he goes, I remember someone, and he's pointing to himself, I imagine, but we were in the same boat, someone saying this long before they came to power and getting endless SHIT for it. Others did too. Just so few of us then, not so few now, but now they're in power. Right? It's the same thing. Derek and Whitney and I and everyone in the Independent Media Alliance, we were going, guys, there's a problem here. And not even saying don't vote for left or right. I mean, I was very clearly saying, I argue that's something you should at least consider. But as you remember, I was saying, well, if you do, which you should go vote for who you believe in. If that's Trump, then do so. But just acknowledge the reality of what we're discussing and consider whether or not the only 2 things in front of you are the only 2 choices to go after, and whether or not that is a manipulation in and of itself, and then ask why that may be, and consider if maybe this is the time to literally protest, abstain out of protest, which technically is a valid vote. That's the game they play where they've removed that choice. You're supposed to be able to check abstention and say, I abstain from this vote because I don't believe it's accurate. I believe we're being lied to. I just simply don't want to today for a number of reasons. That is a real vote for not somebody who doesn't care, but somebody who cares so much that they're willing to say, I want my on record vote to say that I'm not participating. And that should then be tallied next to people on the screen. They don't do that anymore. Going back to the founding fathers or any situation, that's always been a conversation, a relevant part of it. So what we were simply saying is just consider other options, because guess what, guys? Technocracy is right in front of you. Israel's influencing this to an insane degree, right? Or just simply, I go on forever. The point is, you were black-pilled because you were calling out, the obvious they're now all seeing, and the fact that we should simply consider other choices, right? Stand back and ask yourself if there's another direction to take. Oh, that's a purity test. So telling you that you are your own savior is somehow the one, it was hilarious, but a lot of people are now seeing it. Catherine Austin Fitz and I on 2024 September. See beyond the duopoly and take responsibility for your future. This was before the selection process. We were just trying to show people what they're all now beginning to see. That's really not even I told you so. It's about thinking about stop falling for the partisan head fakes and grand deceptions right before things happen. That's how this goes. And it's beginning to happen again right now. Now, this is the two-party sort of woke overlap that is really no different than what we saw before. So it's just, this is what they all keep doing. Elon Musk says the pronoun BS is finally going away. That was silly. Well, yeah. I mean, I honestly think that most liberals also agree with that. Like, I don't mean like the core screamers, like the right has the same thing, that they represent themselves as all Republicans, even though I see most conservatives that are going, I don't know about all this right now. I know it's a largely unpopular opinion, but I can't stop. The evidence is everywhere that you can see a general pushback from a lot of these things. And I knew plenty of people that consider themselves more on the liberal side of things that were going, this is insane. Like, call yourself whatever you want. But the moment you force this on everybody else, that's crazy. And that's because of constitutional rights perspectives. And that exists for most people in this country, left and right, despite the screamers trying to frame each side as the one that doesn't care. So my point is, he points to that for a very clear reason, because it's exactly what they're doing right now, using a different tool. And so they want you to think, well, he pointed to the thing, so he's not doing it. It's basic reverse psychology. And I said, and you've simply replaced it with another form of censorship based on, quote, hate speech for anti-Semitism, or plenty of other things, by the way. I'll show you a couple examples of the woke right canceling people because they say the wrong things or because they yell at somebody on the street. But I said, you're transparent and no different than the woke left. And this, as Susan Carroll says, great example here. I cannot see the replies to your post. Quick side note. But it's just, this is so transparent. And it seems to happen to me every time I comment underneath people like him, every time I leave something like this that's, calling out the illusion of the partisan side. Here, look for yourself. It says 9 comments. There's nothing down there. And that everyone else sees the same thing, apparently. They go, look, yeah, I can't see your post. This one says, yeah, 7 replies, and yours is the only one I can see. Now 9. So how do you explain that? My opinion is, and it's not just this one time. I've showed this 1,000 times. It's because this post under people like him that gets, like, I think most people read that and they go, yeah, that is right. They are censoring on hate speech. It is the same thing. It's very easy to see. And I'm of the mind that most people already do. So these posts are kind of dangerous from whoever it is, especially people with some kind of a following. So they basically get suppressed. They step on it. They reduce the engagement. I don't get to see any of the comments, and neither anybody else. So you don't get to see that everyone's like, yeah, that is crazy. We do agree, which is what I'm generally seeing. It's everywhere I look right now. But please question it. I could be wrong. Ask yourself, but look. Here's another example. Cat Turd puts this out and it says, well, Clown World puts this out. It goes, you should all change your core values and beliefs so I fit in. And of course, it's a liberal, Democrat woman with crazy hair shouting at everybody, which does exist. And that's laughably stupid. And it's exactly what's happening in some cases on the left. And he goes, perfect. My point? I said, there, fix it for you. I just added a MAGA hat on top of her, and it's the same point. Now, yes, obviously the hair, that if you're fixating on the small attributes, which actually I said to somebody down here, like that if all you're fixating on are the chosen attributes of what they want you to see as the woke left, then you're missing the bigger picture. It's about the ideology, guys. It's about cancel culture. It's about identity politics, censorship based on hate speech. It's blatantly the same thing with a slightly different flavor. How do we not see the same thing right now where the Republicans are doing the same thing? It's just in reverse. So they're pointing at what they're doing and saying, no, that's wrong. You need to be like us, right? It's just funny how obvious it is that it's the same exact thing from a different side, and they just can't see it in themselves. Same point here. And this is, you might have seen this going around. I mean, look, this guy who is shouting at this other guy is being ridiculous. Now, who knows what happened before this? Maybe that guy was doing it first and he shouted back. It doesn't change anything. The way this guy's conducting himself is just embarrassing. It's in my opinion, look, you can feel maybe it's necessary to scream at somebody on the street. I think it's fruitless. And I think obviously it turns out like this, where you look like the crazy person on camera. The point is, if you watch it, it's a guy with a Trump hat on, and he's basically just walking behind him the whole time going, you're a piece of POS, and just cussing at him and get that hat off. I mean, it's stupid, right? Because if you arguing that guy is the fascist, then why are you screaming he has to take his hat off? It's the same difference. That's my point, guys. They're all acting the same ways and only point at each other. Or point at the other side. He's of course he's allowed to wear a Trump hat. It's ridiculous. But in this case, that guy is kind of the one that looks ridiculous. The one screaming at the guy walking down the street who appears to be very calm. And this point is Nikki, this person, Nikki says, make him famous, everyone, and tags libs, TikTok, DC Drano, all the people. Now, of course, if you look down, scroll at the comments and look at their feeds right now, they tracked him down, they found his name, and I believe he's about to get fired from his job. The point is, DC Drano says, anyone in Boston know who this Marxist scumbag is? And the reality, and I called him the woke right, bro flakes, it's the same thing you start seeing. They basically doxed this person. Now, look, he was being an idiot. And frankly, even though I agree that doxing, especially on this platform, is supposed to not be allowed, or that doxing is something that, is a step too far in many cases, the point is that it's kind of the way it works. If you're going to act like an idiot, I was going to mildly cuss right there, a JASS, then that's what's going to happen to you, right? So in a way, you got what he deserved, but I argue that nonetheless, it is something that is at the very least, let's put it this way, whether you think it's justified or not, it's exactly what they would point to at the left. And they would say, you're doxing this person, or you're attacking him because of things he said. Well, yeah, right? And that's exactly what's happening here, even though this guy is acting like a fool. It's just words, right? So now you're telling me that this is important. Words at you are enough to get people removed from their jobs or to dox people online. You are the woke right. It is the exact same thing. And they're all tag teaming with major influence to basically destroy people's lives. How is that different than cancel culture on the left? The point is, it's the exact same thing that we showed you in the past around the Trump shooting discussion, where libs of TikTok and a whole cabal of these people online got this random lady fired from Home Depot and plenty of others because she made a very bad joke about Trump. That he should have aimed better. Was what I think it's what it was. Well, yeah, I said the same thing. It's very distasteful. It's a human being, whether it's Trump or not. And the bottom line is it's still speech. And every day you see those sort of things being made about Democrats, it's all hypocrisy. And these people are literally the woke right, who are doing the exact same thing. And most of them know and don't care because it's not about the truth for them. Here's another example. Cat Turd says, or the meme, or the cartoon rather, shows a Democrat, I imagine, based on the clothes and the hair, and it says, I love my Tesla. Then the next thing is CNN saying, Elon is Hitler. Then it shows at the bottom going, I'm burning the Tesla with the tiki torch. Nice touch by the tiki torch, by the way, is jamming these things together. And I simply said, and then Cat Turd says, and that's exactly how easy it is to brainwash a leftist. And I said, and the exact opposite is exactly what you all did. Literally, guys. So they go, we hate Teslas and electric cars. And they go, Elon needs your help. And they're, we love Teslas now. It's literally the exact opposite of that. And I said, and that is how easy it is to brainwash partisans. You absolute clown. And remember the tweet we put out on the March 24th, where I said, and just like that, Republicans now support electric vehicles, but just the right ones. I mean, it's just so embarrassing. Like, I mean, do you think he can't? I mean, what do you think genuinely? Do you think he can't see it that way of himself, or do you think he knows and doesn't care? Because, I mean, this is objectively exactly what they're doing. We've all made the joke about how they were calling out electric vehicles. And I even literally showed you Cat Turd's own thread where he was going, these old electric vehicles are stupid and they'll never come to pass. And I think I actually have hold on. Oh, that might be it. Oh, perfect. And so I said, well, that's your age badly. He says, so, everything about electric cars suck. It's not the way of the future and never will be. It's a bad joke pushed by woke idiots and elitist morons. Here he is going, drive your Tesla proudly. It's like, what a clown. How silly is that? And that's how this works. I'll include that for you. All I'm really highlighting is the hypocrisy, but that my point is, if I believe personally that there's more honest people than not. I think that's why they pretend out there to be good and do good in the world. They pretend all those things because that's what we want from them, mostly. Whether it's 51%, right? It doesn't always have to be everybody. The point is that people out there they see through this stuff because it's wildly contradictory. So that's why I definitely think more people than not are seeing it. Now, Whitney, this is back from 2024, but she had back then responded to what Tim Pool said about attacks on Elon Musk, saying the attacks on Elon and the narrative, the whole thing was the same time frame about Elon and Teslas, and they were like defending one of the allegedly richest people in the world who has influence more than anybody. But oh, poor Elon, he's getting called mean names on Twitter. Yeah, woke right, guys, woke right. Because I'm not falling for it. It's a psyop that they're trying to trick you to, it says they've been trying to get Elon MAGA to go to war. They keep doing this, and they're doing it right now with the MAGA, the Israel point saying that this has been a ploy to divide MAGA. And my comment online has been, they don't need that to divide them, guys, because most partisans, in my opinion, are not complete morons. And they're not falling for such ridiculous, that's the point. And so he was doing the same thing back then. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for the obvious evidence in front of you, right? Because they're just trying to divide you. So ignore it and keep moving forward in the mindless, two-step of supporting your chosen ideologue. And Whitney says, the real op was the effort to convince regular Americans that Silicon Valley oligarchs, who literally help build and maintain the surveillance state for intelligence, deeply invest in, promote mRNA tech, want to price carbon, develop pre-crime tech, used to target both conservatives and leftists alike, and are pushing for surveillance programmable money to in between. She says that Silicon Valley oligarchs cared about them and wanted to restore the country to prior times. That was the real op, to convince us that was the case. They want to build an American technate where they hold all the power and wealth, and you drink out of the trough in a digital cattle pen while they milk you for data. And Tim Pool is part of that agenda, in my opinion, whether he knows it or not. So this is the idea, is that when all they want, you just hate Elon Musk. It's like, that's what they're trying to pivot from. And it's like insane. Look at the mRNA platform he rolled out. Look at all the things. Look at everything that has changed direction. And we just hate that guy. It's like, frankly, I have a distasteful opinion of pretty much everybody in politics, and Biden and Trump, exactly the same, in my opinion. So if all it is that's why in most cases, these arguments you don't get a lot of responses from some of these people, because all they know how to respond to is that you're a Democrat. Right? You're the other side. When you frame it in a way that makes them all look the same, it's hard for them in some cases to argue outside of just calling you names and using straw man arguments, which again is why this is becoming so obvious. It's becoming very clunky and clumsy. Here's another example of that. Great point by Brendan Circus. He said Project Mockingbird, if you don't remember, was, it's an abstract thing. Great work by Kerry Wedler a while back about this, pretty much showing that this tends to be kind of a caricature of what it really was, even though it's very real. And there's a lot to it. It was more abstract and more sprawling than like this really deliberate, point is Project Mockingbird is worth your investigation, and don't take the kind of packaged characterization of it that makes it this one-stop thing. That's not explained very well. The point is, Kerry's gone in depth and showed you there's a lot of misrepresentations about it in the past. But generally speaking, it was about the government basically buying off and influencing people in the media, rather like the CIA and intelligence. But it says that Project Mockingbird uses predictive programming to execute influence operations that aim to get people to shut up and trust the plan. Trust the plan, right? We've heard that plenty. Here is a recent report back and forth with Tucker Carlson about Dan Bongino. And just tell me how you can fall. I mean, why would anybody who is actually objective, seeking truth, wants accurate information, would go, well, we should, that guy's there, so that means I can trust what he says. It goes back to that same point from Free Prince. To argue that you have blind faith in any person is the problem. And this is how it gets built.
Just from the outside, watching Dan and sort of his authenticity on all of these issues through the years, it makes me feel better that he's going to be in a position to tell me what's going on. You know what I mean? Sure. As an American. For sure. Because if he comes back to me and he's like, look, the Epstein files, we really did look for them. It turns out they've all been destroyed. There are huge categories of people I wouldn't trust on that subject. At least with Dan, I'd be like, I believe that. I believe what you're telling me.
Yes, and he has, he's almost constitutionally unable to deal with too much lying.
What does that even mean? Almost constitutionally unable to deal with too much lying? You want to break up that word salad for me? How in the world, so now he's a government official, so he's constitutionally bound in a lot of ways. Lying is not one of them. I mean, you guys realize that you're allowed to lie under free speech. That's the reality of it. So what he's really trying to convince you of is that somehow, I mean, it doesn't even sound like that point is as a government official. Somehow the Constitution drives him to not lie to you guys. He's already been caught lying to you. These people are not honest, in my opinion. The reality of this is they're trying to convince you that the current government official who is in charge of most of these agencies have provenly, and the game is to pretend like it's different now, but historically, and even to this day, you can prove how these agencies have been used to manipulate you. And right now, I think it's obviously for a foreign power. And I'll show you why that's more relevant right now than ever. But to argue that we should, if he says it, then if he just tells you all the files have been destroyed, then I'm going to trust him. Well, I guess they're laying that one out for you right now.
Yeah. It makes him mad. Yeah. And I love that about him.
Oh, okay. So lying makes him mad. So pretty much just assume he's never lying. Great journalism.
his BS meter is in him, and it goes off with a loud siren. So I don't think Dan can even handle sitting and staring at the camera and telling you some elaborate lie. I think I don't think he could do it. Again,
what? You don't think he could do it? So your argument is that he can't lie to you? I mean, guys, am I crazy or is that insane? Like that's too far for them. Nobody should look at that like that makes sense. You're literally convincing people they should just trust somebody in government? Well, that's what they always do. That's just very blunt, very in your face. Oops. There we go. Now I'll include the Free Prince post just since I mentioned it, where Catherine's saying, I have 100% full faith in Cash and Dan Bongino. And simple argument is that's, there's no more dangerous sentence in the modern world than I have 100% full faith in some person out there, especially when they're in the government. Now here is a clip from David Icke. This is, by the way, interesting because it's on the Tim Cash or Tim Pool, whatever show. And what's crazy to me is in every context, even the Epstein conversation, but especially where it comes into contact with the Israel conversation, Tim Pool is a straight up gatekeeper. He always pushes back on that. Even like Scott Horton comes on and talks about these very real things that you can't, like that you can literally prove today, even from Israeli media. And Tim's like, I'm not gonna get it. Oh, U.S. liberty. I'm not gonna get into that today. This is just so ridiculous to me. Well, these are very important and very central conversations to many things. Or, it's like Ben Shapiro telling you who cares who killed JFK so long ago. It's just crazy. So this, and just what I was going to say in general is this person, watch this for yourself. There's something about, and this is completely my opinion, but I trust my gut instinct in a lot of ways. I don't let that guide me no matter, only. It's about what I can prove. But when it comes to just my own personal opinion, which I'll express as always, it's just an opinion. And really anything, even my investigations, there's important to listen to yourself, internal, your instincts. And everything about this person, the way he moves, the way his mannerisms, the way I get a very bad sense about it, more than most. Something about this person feels very dishonest to me. That's just my opinion. Again, there's examples we've already seen of shifty actions. All of them right now. The way they're dealing with a lot of this stuff is very disconcerting. But I just want to point that out. That's kind of the impression I get of just the way he presents himself. The way, it's about the way he's talking. I get the sense like he's trying to kind of manipulate you and kind of corral the conversation. Just my opinion, but listen to him and consider what I'm saying. David says, you mean Dan Bongino, the new, this will be his response. Let me play it first.
About a year and a half after that, I'm in a green room at Fox, and I'm not going to say who because they didn't give me permission to share it, but the short story, but not who they are. It says, Epstein's an intelligence asset for people in the Middle East, right? I'm like, no, I didn't know that. I'm like, you sure of that?
Oh, we didn't know that. That's heartening, right? Didn't know what literally everybody in the world seems to know, or he's lying about it.
The person, let's say, is like, I'm absolutely sure of that he's either a witting or unwitting asset, intelligence asset, meaning.
And of course, very clearly avoids saying the word Israel, even though that's one of the central parts of that conversation, even according to Acosta under Donald Trump.
His plane and that island, the cameras, there's a big assumption out there that these videotapes were exclusively in the custody of Epstein. That's a huge mistake. The reason they wanted this story to go away is because there's an assumption like, oh yeah, Epstein had him. No, he wasn't the only one who had him, according to this source. These assets, that's why this blackmail story makes so much sense. Which Middle Eastern countries they are, I don't know. But this person who's a very, very good reporter, aces, right?
Oh, good. So now he's taking the word of a corporate media person. Or, whatever, because let's not pretend he's listening to, Kerry Wedler, or, he is taking a report from people that, like, probably, the CIA guy. We played that clip 1,000 times where they just drip these things out, even to people like him. I get that's another way to put it. I get the sense that he's somebody who's being played by the people he thinks he's part of. Like, he's the kind of person that I think becomes a scapegoat, who thinks he's in the know and is really being manipulated. That's the sense I get. As Andrew in chat says, he's a bad actor. It's a good way to put it. But the overall, think about what he's saying right now. Like this is some new breaking thing. It just seems very dishonest. And of course, Tim laps it up.
I don't know. But this person who's a very, very good reporter, aces, right? swore Epstein was either a witting or unwitting intelligence asset, and they may have had his plane wired up, and they're the ones who have all this stuff.
Oh, but you don't, though. Cool. So you have all this access to all the files and all these claims and whatever video recordings you're claiming are there. So when are we going to get those, Dan? Can we expect that by tomorrow? Is that going to be something released? You know the answer to that. Look at where we are right now, and look at how the screaming partisans out there are. Neither side, by the way, seems to care that we never got anything in this conversation. Hey, DC Drano, libs of TikTok, where's phase 2 binders? Is that information coming? Is that crickets? Yeah, I don't hear anything.
So the point is, to sum it up, how do you know some of these countries aren't going to some of these power players who aren't making decisions? Because, hey, you wouldn't want this video out there, right? How do you know?
100%. So the point is, the Middle East countries have blackmail on us. Got it. So you used all of that. You're literally using the Israeli sexual blackmail network that's controlling part of the United States, if not all, to just pivot it to go, well, Middle East countries have gotten that information and are using it to blackmail people. What a clumsy. So, look, consider everything certainly possible. The idea, though, that you're going to pivot the whole thing into Middle East bad guys are using it against us, but what he's talking about is using our sexual proclivities on tape against us. It's like the argument that RFK is being blackmailed. It's like, well, okay, that the point is that if that is the case, then there's something worthy of blackmail. Don't you care about what that is? Or you just want to defend him because he's being taken advantage of? What if he's on video raping children? Are you still going to go, well, he was the one that was being taken advantage of? I'm not saying there's any evidence of that. It's just wild to me the way this goes forward. And again, that's why I see so many people out there, left and right, who are like, this is obvious. I agree. So David, in response to that, says, you mean Dan Bongino, the new Israel First Deputy Director of the FBI, needed someone to tell him that Epstein was an intelligence asset and he can't even bring himself to say Israel, even though that is literally on documentation about part of the conversation? American criminals, he says, must be laughing so hard. Rumble investor Bongino, obviously important right there to think about, like Peter Thiel, by the way, so will work with Israel Firster FBI Director Patel in a Trump regime utterly drowning in Israel Firsters. And think about, in general sense, the FBI, how long have we talked about? There's articles on TLAV. I might not be able to pull it up right away because I haven't pulled it up in a long time. But the idea, and I agree with this, that the FBI from its origin has been an anti-American thing. It has been something that has been directly in contradiction to what we believe we are, to the Constitution, and has really just been focusing on you in ways that are more than just protecting you from bad guys. We've talked, The Intercept did a great piece on this, but even the New York Times a while ago reported how the FBI manufactures the vast majority of what they claim to stop. That's not a joke. It's easy to prove. There's a lot of reports on this. Just because we want to pretend that he's now different, which is the argument for everything. Again, let's wait and see what happens. It's arguably right now you can already tell, but fine, let's pretend like that, giving the trust the plan, give them time thing makes sense. In a year, in a month, in 4 years, when everything's still the same, I'm at least hoping people can call that out. I hope I'm wrong. But in case you need to hear it again, here's Dan Bongino telling you what is most important to him.
What cause is dear to your heart?
Cause is dear to my Israel, the defense of Israel.
That's weird. Just like it was last time we played it. That's what your response is? What's dear to your heart? And your one answer is, and reiterate, Israel, defense of Israel. Am I the only one that finds that insane? This is a person who's running the FBI now, who's an American, in American politics, who's supposed to be an America First, Republican patriot, and his first response is defense of Israel? Yeah, because there's a wildly obvious vein, if not the majority of the leadership of that conversation, that is not America First. Clearly. Here is a clip. Actually, I don't think I grabbed this one. Not worth playing it because just the point is that Bill Maher, he's just always such a, in a lot of ways, pre-fair weather when it comes to his interest. But the Vigilant Fox says, Bill Maher says his mind was blown to come to the realization that Trump is much more self-aware and personable than he ever imagined. And here we go. Now Bill Maher thinks Trump is not that bad. And it's the same old point, whether it's working with Clinton, whether it is the, even just the joke we were actually laughing about at the show the other night. Remember when I said this right in the beginning of this administration, where it was like, it's funny how the people who are the Republican side of the conversation, who are obviously more likely to call out what I would argue conspiracy theories, or rather just theories, many of which are true, by the way, but just, jumping at everything, which in some cases is good, but a lot of times it leads into assumption that guides the conversation. My point is, obviously, they were more willing to at least ask those questions, right? About coups and all sorts of things. My thought was, okay, well, are you not at least willing to consider that you're witnessing a Democrat coup? Now, my opinion. I think it's all the same. It's your government. But what's funny is you've got RFK Jr., Democrat, Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat, Trump, former Democrat, Elon Musk, Democrat, and arguably never even, technically, officially it's changed on paper, which I think is kind of meaningless. But it's funny to me, isn't it? And the point is, you got Bill Maher, and who's the other ones now? I'm forgetting off the top of my head. There's been like 3 or 4 examples of like major lefty people, like a Bill Gates even. Remember meeting Trump and saying we're working together on the platforms, and then they come out with an mRNA platform. But it's okay because they're on our side now. Victory. Or all of the Silicon Valley people packed it as a inauguration from Apple. It's just, and again, and I say it for the 100th time, that is why a lot of conservatives are like, that's crazy. That's not right. That doesn't feel right. What happened to putting them in jail? Where are all the rest? Or everything else they've talked about? All of the crimes and the fraudulent activity and the money being spent. Has anybody been arrested? Seems like they're only going after people to speak about Israel who haven't been actually charged with a crime. But Sam Tripoli says it's crazy to me to see Bill Maher starting to like Trump when Trump's own fan base is starting to have problems with the level Zionist fellatio going on by this administration. That's not the word he used for the podcast, but think about that. Everyone sees it, guys, and he's right. As his base begins to kind of crumble because of how wildly opposite it is, you got people on the other, which is showing you they're circling the wagons, as I see it. That's my opinion. The partisan, all of it, your government, and their manipulators like Bill Maher, in my opinion. Now, this is just to speak to the sort of cultish mentality of why people don't see it. And I mean the ones that choose not to, or the ones that don't care. The people trapped in the hardcore team sport politics side, which, I do think includes some people that are just choosing that, or I guess not aware enough to see it. But I very clearly think that's the minority of the conversation. But it's stuff like this that's not just, this is alarming from so many levels. But just the main point is about how this kind of thing is what stops people from seeing what is obviously in front of them because they're enamored. Like it's a cult. I mean, and that's not, I very much don't think that's just the right. That's just what we're seeing very vividly right now. But the left and COVID, and it's the same thing. The partisan sides are cultish activities, guys. I mean, what I was going to say earlier that I forgot too, both these sides, left and right of the team sport politics. I mean, these are activists, guys. If you look at what they're doing every day, and all of them, or even Alex Jones, who's just constantly tweeting about, right now trying to bolster up Bukele's image because he's about to come here going, he's on our side. These are cheerleaders, and that's activism. They're actively trying to fight for a certain thing, a certain outcome, a certain perception. They're not just reporting the truth. They're actively trying to achieve an end through what they post. My opinion, but I think it's quite obvious. That's activism. So when they're screaming about politically activated, what they call it, radical activism on the left, it's the same damn thing, guys. But this is what guides a lot of this because they believe they're being guided by God in some cases. People in Israel, literally in their leadership, say Trump is a prophet, say that he's going to bring on the end times. Pete Hegseth is very much of the mind that is where we're going, saying the head, or I'm blanking on his name, one of the earlier ones, the gray-haired guy. I forget his name, but who said the end times are near and this is what's going to happen. I mean, this is insane to me. Now, not from a religious perspective, but the idea that what they're saying is that that's coming because of what Israel's doing, because of their, for example, genetically engineering a red heifer, like things that are not a miracle through God, but something they've made happen through Zionism. And these people are on board with that. So Noctis Draven says, at what point do we call it what it is? Idol worship, which is blasphemy. He says, it's just a man, just a regular man. You will never convince me that this is not a cult. Watch this. Thank you, Almeida Huckabee. Just for the record, because that's important to go back and look at him stating, even before being put in the position, that he believes that the end times are near. And that's, I mean, these people are in positions of power. And that, whether you agree with it or not, the point is that they do, and that they are acting in such a way. And then realize that what they're pointing to are not things that are, look, if you understand this, and it's important to me to not try to overlap this with my religious perspective on it, because I think that's always a bad thing to do from a journalistic perspective. But that's what they're doing is the point. But if you just look into the information, It's just like the founding of Israel, guys. It was given to them by the British government, the Balfour Declaration from Rothschild, and the point was that that's not God-given. That was given to you by a government, and they were working with Nazis and Stalin, and that's all on the record. Zionism. It didn't even want the European Jewish population to come. That was a big thing for them. Very clearly, there's documents where they outline the point is that they pretend the Israel from the Bible because they chose the name. And it's the same thing they're doing to this very day. Zionist political organization is trying to hijack people like this. And Huckabee is I'm glad you brought that up because he wants you to remember who it is and look at the people like that and what they're saying. This is a video for the podcast of a woman. It's like a religious gathering and they're singing in praise and, amen. And she's painting a picture of Trump. Oh, sorry. I gave that away for people watching, but you'll see right now. Look at that. Now, what's weird to me is that's not just Trump looking at like what looks like a cross on a hill. That looks like fire to me in the background. This is overwhelming, guys. This is a clear problem. Now, look, obviously, if you have the most basic understanding of the Christian religion or most, that's idolatry. You are praising him as a symbol. And that's not to say they more than God. I'm sure they don't think that. The point is, nonetheless, you're raising him up as an idol. And if you understand it, that is blasphemy. I'm not saying that as a Christian. I'm saying that as a fundamental fact in this conversation. And so understand that that's a weird thing to happen. And all I'm saying it for is to recognize that guides people clearly far more than the facts. And that is my whole point of why it's so problematic that people out there on the right are mashing together their religious beliefs and their journalism, if you can even call it that. Because you will come to points like this where if they're of the mind that he's sent by God, well, that means that everything he does is God's will. So when he murders all these children in Gaza, if he bombs people in the Sudan or Somalia, or if he goes on to manipulate the election in Ecuador, that's all because that's what they believe. How do you not see that as alarming and dangerous? Now, this, again, is what he said. And Khaleesi said the same thing. This is the crazy cult of Christian Zionists. And I agree with that. This is not just, look, there's plenty of people that are Christian that probably feel a similar way, but I argue if you truly understand this, that's a basic part of it, you would realize that's blasphemous. Zionists, on the other hand, don't care. It's not about that. And it's a weird overlap of this kind of forceful, worldly, I guess like pretend overlap of religion. And the point is that everything they're doing seems to be contradicting their true, the real beliefs in the background, or the idea that there are Christian or rather atheist Zionists that are leading parts of these movements. The founder of Zionism, Herzl, was an atheist himself. There's a very problematic thing here, guys. Now, this person says, you're right. Here is the cult. Here it is cult. This is from, see, I feel like this is a bot because of the way they're typing that. It says, you're right here. It is cult. This is from show 4-year-old boy is supposed to be girl given flower. That's actually how it reads. Wrong capital. The clumsy effort, which is still true, is to say that's the cult, the left and their woke politics. Yeah, but here's the point. They're both that way. See, this is my point from earlier is why these people have such a hard time arguing against those that can see through the full picture, because they expect you to go, no, it's that's their choice. And that's the one. They're both the problem. Both of these are the same thing. Both of them are cultish mentalities driving you to, I guess, arguably accept the other one or just blind yourself to all of it. That is the reality. The two-party illusion is the crux of our problem. And here's an example of that. Alex doing his breaking neck journalism says, President Trump is a bull and is destroying the globalist system by lifetime or in lifetime. This is the kind of reporting you're now getting from this administration or from people like him or the mainstream alternative media hot seat in the White House press briefing. Let's get ready for this hot, hot, I was going to say hot take, but really you'd say this, pressing journalistic question that she asked that's supposed to break the story.
Will you guys also consider releasing the president's fitness plan? He actually looks healthier than ever before. Healthier than he did 8 years ago, and I'm sure everybody in this room could agree. Is he working out with Bobby Kennedy? And is he eating less McDonald's?
Oh my God, he looks so good. Is he working out with McDonald's? Oh my God, this is ridiculous. That is not a journalistic question. That is a fan question. That's insane to me. Like, I'm not like just for the record, most people in that room are probably ridiculous in the exact opposite way, right? Where they are blind mainstream media manipulators. But nonetheless, it's the point. That's the fake binary. That's the ridiculous counterbalance. So you either accept the manipulating long-term half CIA manipulators, or you go with people like that. They're like, oh, he looks so good, Trump. It's just like this game of children and assets. And they're screaming for you to pick a side. I mean, that's insane to me. But of course, you know, the point was to look at this being shared. She's doing great. Trump's amazing. Why? I mean, it's hero worship, guys. It's wild. It's wild. Now, overlapping with DOGE, which is very important. It's important. I want to make sure we don't miss the fact that this is continued to just like right now we are getting people that are blindly taking at face value what the government says, and Elon's a part of that. And just like Insurrection Barbie and the rest, where he says, this just happened. And they go, breaking, Benny Johnson, this just happened, with no way to verify that. But they said, so news. It's sad. It's ridiculous. But the point is that you can see DOGE specifically lying about a lot of the stuff that I have personally gone through contracts and shown you on this show. Here's a clip from Fox News, which I find to be even more relevant. But of course, they're just rhinos when they say the wrong thing. This is not just because Fox said it. This is important information. Oh, wait, hold on, make sure I didn't lose that. Oh, I did. That's weird. Here is a clip from Fox News simply arguing that the data, as we showed you a month ago, actually, and now it's even more so to this day, doesn't actually show what they claim it does. That the deficit is that what they're claiming they're doing by saving is not actually happening. Now, don't take it Fox News' word for it. Let me play the clip, and then we'll get into some of the information.
All right, we are taking a live look at the nation's capital. We got sunnier weather than they do in D.C. DOGE keeps cutting government services and personnel, but the Treasury Department says it's not making much of a difference to America's bottom line. Madeline Rivera has more on why the president, though, is defending DOGE.
Elon's done a fantastic job.
The Department of Government Efficiency says it's saved American taxpayers more than $150 billion so far. But new data shows despite deep cuts to government services, DOGE hasn't made a dent in the deficit. According to the Treasury Department, spending is up more than $139 billion in the first 3 months of President Trump's new term, with the federal government borrowing $41 million more during that period than last year. Democrats are now questioning whether DOGE is adding to the deficit by making cuts that later end up being overturned by the courts.
I've never seen any of their responses contain cost-benefit analysis as they wipe out people from offices who they have to recall 2 or 3 days later.
President Trump is defending DOGE, pointing out it's finding and stopping significant fraud throughout the government, including almost $400 million in fraudulent unemployment payments over the past 5 years.
And some of it is just absurd, like people getting unemployment insurance who haven't been born yet. I mean, I think anyone can appreciate whether, I mean, come on. That's just crazy.
But even some Republicans are starting to worry that the cost cutting isn't enough, and DOGE needs to go after bigger fish.
You watch. Next year, we'll spend more money than we did this year, and the year after that, we will too.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says if the spending doesn't slow down, the U.S. will hit its debt ceiling by early summer. In Washington, Madeline Rivera, Fox 32 Chicago. Anthony, back to you.
Yep, pretty interesting. So, obviously, the point is clearly that the information doesn't seem consistent, you know, and what you hear from him saying something at that table, which, by the way, is just a demonstration. You know what I mean? Like the idea that you pretend like it's more transparent because they sit there and yell and say things out loud and act like, you know, I mean, the point is that process, whether it's them on that you know, mafioso-like table where they're all talking to each other or just putting it out in some kind of place on the news, it's the same point. They always say these things. The question is, do you just take it at face value because you see Elon saying it or because it's reported by some corporate platform? Neither should be taken at face value, you know? And so what we're talking about here is obvious information that there's a game being played, and some choose to take it at face value, what they claim, and others seem to question it. And, you know, somewhere, as always, somewhere in the middle. But the game here is that clearly, if they're claiming they've been saving all this money, and all they're really doing is repositioning everything. What's the real outcome here? And is there money going places we don't see? His point about cost benefit analysis, like, is it really even more efficient? What's the real outcome here? Here is New York Times saying DOGE is far short of its goal and still overstating its progress. Now, it says last week, Elon Musk indicated for the first time that his Department of Government Efficiency was falling short of its goals. He previously said his powerful budget-cutting team could reduce the next fiscal year's federal budget by $1 trillion, which we've already discussed, and do it by September 30th, the end of the current fiscal year. Instead, in the cabinet meeting, the one you saw a quick clip of, on Thursday, Mr. Musk said that he anticipated the group would have saved about $150 billion, 85% less than his objective. Now, again, to the point, the things he's pointing to, I've never been suggesting that there's not waste. There obviously is, and that's left and right. And you can see that going back multiple administrations. Right. So, yes, if we're actually ending waste, that's always a good thing. But if we're only ending some things and not others, or you're couching it in one part of the paradigm and secretly continuing it over here, obviously that's not a good thing. And I have continued to see those things everywhere. Now, it says even that figure may be too high in regard to $150 billion, according to the New York Times analysis of their claims. Now, no way should you just trust the New York Times. Look for yourself. And the only reason I feel like there's credence to this is because I have personally verified many of these examples, and I've done it live on the show. It says that's because when Mr. Musk's group tallies up its savings so far, it inflates its progress by including billion-dollar errors, by counting spending that will not happen until next fiscal year, for example, and by making guesses about spending that might not even happen at all. And I'll give you a couple of examples before we move on. Just basically things that the contracts that haven't been fulfilled, that were never even technically going to be, they just pretend that it was going to be maximized. And then saying we saved $20 million, even though only $1 million have been spent, for example. And what's interesting in that point is to say that there's an argument made that if you cancel a $20 billion contract, only $1 billion has been spent, that therefore you save $19 billion of money that might have been spent. That's not inaccurate. But what's hilarious to me is that they're arguing that they saved all this money when that basically, aren't you the ones in charge, right? You're the government, right? So the argument is that if you hadn't canceled the contract, that then you would go on to spend the $19 billion. That doesn't make any sense, but you're the one, you just not fulfill it. So the clear argument is that wasn't going to be fulfilled because they're the ones in charge. So to argue by ending it, it somehow saves $19 billion. It's a deception. But that's the simple one. There's much more obvious ones. And it goes on to say, one of the group's largest claims, in fact, involves canceling a contract that simply did not exist. Things like that, which I've shown on the show. Although the government says it had merely asked for proposals in that case and had not settled on a vendor or a price, Mr. Musk's group ignored that uncertainty and assigned itself a large and very specific amount of credit for canceling it, even though that doesn't exist. It's basically a manufactured number. And it says it said it had saved exactly $318,310,320.30. My opinion, the specificity is to try to make it seem like it's exact when that doesn't really align to anything. He says Mr. Musk's group has now triggered mass firings across the government and sharp cutbacks. And by the way, even here, there are links that you can check for yourself. But my point is you can do the due diligence for yourself on USA spending and look at these contracts. I'll show you a couple of examples. But it's saying his group has triggered mass firings across government and sharp cutbacks in humanitarian aid around the world, which mostly I agree with. There's very specific examples that I think have been done the wrong way. But overall, the main point, I'm okay with stopping literally everything till we figure out what's going on. Literally everything going out of this country should stop until we know how this is working. And that includes Israel too, but that's why this will never stop. And now don't forget, they're already flirting with the idea of some massive contract for far more money, which they increase every single year. A memorandum of understanding for Israel. Right now, it's at $3.8 billion a year for 10 years that Obama started. Or rather, I think it was, forget where it increased. Either way, the point is they increase it periodically. That's already being floated again. But it says Mr. Musk has justified those disruptions in regard to what they spend around the world with two promises: that the group would be transparent, which they clearly are not, and that it would achieve budget cuts that others called impossible. It says now, watching the group pare back its aims and puff up its progress, some of its allies have grown doubtful about both. And this is important because there are a lot of libertarian Republican overlaps that very much don't agree with some of the things that are happening or call out their lies around this, even though they support DOGE in general. Now it says, quote, they're just spinning their wheels, citing in many cases overstated or fake savings. According to Romina Busia, the director of budget and entitlement policy at the Libertarian Cato Institute. Quote, it says, what's most frustrating is that we agree with their goals, but we're watching them flail at achieving them. And it's not even just what's in this article. You can look on Twitter for yourself. There's a lot of people calling this stuff out. The White House press office defended the team, saying it had compiled, quote, massive accomplishments, but declined to address specific instances where the group seemed to have inflated its progress. That's just the typical, right? Especially today, left and right. They just scream the thing you're supposed to say out loud, even though you can prove that's not the case in most ways. But it says Mr. Musk actually promised an even larger reduction last year when he was Mr. Trump's most prominent supporter on the campaign trail. He said he would cut $2 trillion. He did. Mr. Musk's group was provided an online ledger, has provided an online ledger of its budget cuts, which he calls the wall of receipts, which we've shown you. I'll bring it up in a second. The site was just updated on Tuesday to show an estimated savings of over $150 billion, or of $150 billion, because that's the claim made in front of people on camera. The ledger is riddled with omissions and flaws. Please look for yourself. It's not hard to find these. I'll show you one that I just grabbed right away. Now it says the site also gives no identifying details about $92 billion of its claimed savings, which is more than 60%. So if you're going to claim to be transparent and only give you a limited image, right, to get 40%. So they claim $150 billion, but they give you 40% of the receipts. Why does that feel honest to you? Anybody? They could give you the rest of the information if they wanted to. The obvious point is they're lying to you. Like, I don't mean because of what we can't see yet. I mean because of what we've already proven to you, from Gaza condoms to the fact that right now they're still funding male circumcision in Tanzania, in South Africa, HIV prevention, climate change direction. I've already shown this 100 times. Of course, if this was broken by somebody in the paradigm, it would be everybody be talking about it, but not going to be shown because it's not important for the partisan right now. The truth is, it's obvious. Think about how wild that is, that they're still funding one of the major things they claim that is the big left problem, and nobody calls that out, except TLAV. Now it says Mr. Musk's group has deleted some of its original errors, like entries that triple counted the same savings. Easily proven. A claim that confused billions with millions. I showed that on the show. And items that claim credit for canceling contracts that actually ended when George W. Bush was president. We also showed you one that ended. Oh, no, actually, I think that's the same one, before Biden. So yeah, same point. The point is that they are misrepresenting this information, and the links are included. The second largest savings that the group lists on its site comes from a canceled IRS contract that DOGE says saves $1.9 billion. But the contract it cites was actually canceled when Biden was president. The third largest saving that the group claims comes from a canceled grant to a vaccine nonprofit. Mr. Musk's group says that saved $1.75 billion, but the nonprofit said it had actually been paid in full, so the savings was zero. Oops. In other cases, the itemized claims include, quote, savings that would not happen until fiscal 2026, or might not happen at all. These all matter. In another example, Mr. Musk's group said it had saved $285 million by canceling a contract with a South Dakota company, Project Solutions, Inc., to perform safety inspections in federally subsidized apartment buildings. But that presumed the government would spend money that it had not promised to spend. Or my point that they're in charge, so they wouldn't probably spend it anyway. Why would they need to cancel the contract if they're simply just not going to put the money into it? I mean, you would anyway, right? My point is that by canceling it does not therefore mean that if you hadn't canceled it, that money would have gone out anyway. It wouldn't have, because they're in charge. But it says, in reality, she said the government had, and this is the person that's on the contract. She said, and after they spoke to her, Robin Miller, Project Solutions manager, said the government had agreed to pay only $29 million, of which $1.8 million had been distributed. Another $3 million was owed for complete work. And they're claiming $285 million saved. Miss Miller said her company supported Mr. Musk's mission, but his group had its facts wrong in this case. It's a lot of those out there. Mr. Musk's group also claimed credit for canceling a contract that was not a contract at all. It involved a request for proposal that the Office of Personnel Management had published, seeking simply bids for help with human resources work. Details about this particular request were scarce. Mr. Musk's group provided a tracking number for the requests, but the New York Times was not able to find the number in the databases of previous government solicitations, which, by the way, is right here. I can't find it either. You know what that means? That it's not there, or they lied about the number, or, made a mistake. Kind of hard to see it that way with all the other lies, though, right? So they basically give you this number thinking that most people won't be able to verify because or don't care, and you look it up and it's not there. And the reality is because it's a contract that doesn't exist, because it was only a basically bidding for something that hadn't happened yet. Now it goes on to say, despite that uncertainty, Mr. Musk calculated the savings involved in that cancellation down to the cent. It later rounded the claim to an even dollar, $318,310,328. Even though it's a lie, is the point. They're everywhere, guys. Please take the time to look for yourself. The sad thing is, like we showed you to start, is that people that go, oh, New York Times, Democrat, and just ignore it. Now, yes, the New York Times lies a lot, like they all do, like mainstream alternative media, like corporate media. But what's interesting is the way this plays for a lot of extreme partisans is that it's Democrat stuff, so it's fake, and basically I'm going to dismiss it as fake and never follow up and check for myself. That's willful ignorance. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You are saying, I'm not going to look because I know it's fake, and then not checking for yourself. Had you simply taken the time to look at the actual contract on his website, on the DOGE website, you would have seen that this is true. But because you kick it aside and say Democrat and ignore it, that you pretend going forward that it's not true forever. I believe a lot of cases that's just like a decision. Like you just don't want to see it because it blows up your worldview. But I do think a lot of them are in this kind of weird cult, it's like socially engineered thing where that's just a reflexive game they play because they know and don't really understand that they're deceiving themselves. My opinion. Now, here was the contract of the one that's not there. Here's the actual DOGE site if you want to look for yourself. But here's this one that I grabbed. It's the second one on the list that it's one of the highest savings they claim, which is apparently for almost $2 billion. For the Sentinel Techno Enterprise Program. And here's the actual, this is what, I hated that. I pointed this out when this first happened. Explain to me why they have to go to this makeshift middleman website instead of just literally linking to the contract. You see what I'm saying? Like the idea is you're saying we saved this much money. Okay, then just link to the contract. I think there's obvious reasons they don't do that. So my point is that you take the number, if you want to do this, you could grab the number of the ID, go to USA Spending. Here, I'll show it to you real quick for those that want to follow up and please do your own due diligence and check for yourself. That you go down here and always put the date from when, wherever you're searching for. So for this point, it's when he got elected to now. And then you go down to award ID and simply enter in the number. Just like, well, I didn't grab it, but that's and then it comes up with the page. So you can see right there is the number 203 or 203-2H, 203-28. There's the number right there. Just to make sure you see that. And please look this stuff up. It's important. Here's the contract. This is what I want you to see. Now, you can look on here and you recognize that there's no money payout. This is zeroed out. No results found. So what they're claiming is this somehow saved $2 billion, even though what it appears to me is to something that was basically, it started in August 2024. Nothing had been paid out yet. So this is sort of like a limbo, kind of like the ones we're pointing out before. My point, though, is that this is not accurate representation of what's actually going on. This is them sort of using straw mans to kick things away, to make it seem there's more happening. But this is one of the small ones. I just happened to grab this off the top. We can literally prove, as I've already done, that they're, as we showed you, pointing at old contracts that were already canceled well before they came to power, lying about or mistaking $2 million for $280 million, things like that. It's just simple, guys. And it's whether you're honest with yourself. Doesn't matter if you support him. If you want to pretend that he made a mistake, if it makes it easier for you, acknowledge that it's not accurate. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now, as Patrick Henningsen points out, citing Peter Schiff here, that says, House Republicans just passed Trump's big, ugly budget. It raises the debt ceiling by a record amount and will produce higher spending and larger budget deficits than Biden. The worst part is that we just liberated ourselves from our foreign lenders. Get ready for QE infinity. Qualitative easing. Now, the point here is that he's saying, FYI, as we warned you back in January, DOGE was a scam, a publicity stunt for Elon Musk to distract public from Trump's record spending and bloated $1.2 trillion proposed military budget. Right. So if we're already seeing in the Fox News report saying the same, that the overarching reality is that we're past spending right now compared to last year. The same point made last month. At that point, they were well over what spent last year. So it seems as if there's no on the horizon, no indication that they're actually going to be saving anything. But as I said last time, we'll wait till tomorrow, wait till next month, and then see then. But at this moment, if you're honest, they're not doing what they claimed. I agree with that. On top of that, over to the tariffs point, and there's another point toward the end of the same conversation of the immigration idea where they go, well, we'll give a pass to all of the immigrants on farms and our hotels and restaurants because, they're good people. Oh, hypocrite. Right. So it's only people that criticize Israel that have PhDs, but all of the illegal immigrants that are working on your farms and hotels, that's okay. Who didn't see that coming? It's obvious what's going on. In this case, guess what? Breaking news, smartphones, computers, semiconductors, solar cells, flat panel TV displays, and other electronic devices, servers, computers, are exempt from the tariffs. And this is just I use this to, it's very public. Look it up. It's been reported all over the place from Trump himself. So clearly it's not about what it seems, right? Because a lot of these industries very, very much overlap with China. And so David Icke simply says, are we getting it yet? And Mr. Milchek's vocabulary coach says, Trump supporters in 2030. I know we're all in a concentration camp right now, but Trump is playing 5D chess. Trust the plan. This is obvious, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it is, it's the technocratic future that they're building around you. So all this talk of all the tariff, not when it bumps up against or makes a problem for the oligarchs and Zionists and globalists that are running his campaign, his administration. So we're going to make sure that all continues. Well, what's insane about that is those are like the primary industries this is supposed to affect. It's anybody paying attention who's honest about this recognizes this doesn't make any sense unless it's because of another agenda. Now, we just talked about the $1 trillion plus Pentagon budget, which is very much a promise not kept. And Ukraine is continuing funding, despite what Alex Jones says, and Israel, same thing, and in 24 hours, right? And the reducing spending on the military. Nope. They just give you a rationale and you pretend like that was always the plan. If you're a team sport liar. I want to point out, in regard to the $1 trillion budget and the spending in general, Marilyn pointed this out. I thought this was a good point to reference because it's important to see the full picture. And I'll just read what she wrote. It says, please stop repeating the false report that the Department of Defense has failed audits for 6 years in a row. In 1994, CFO Act required all government agencies to prepare GAAP-based audited financial statements starting in fiscal year 97. The Department of Defense has never been able to produce such audited statements. Each year, the auditors issue a disclaimer. Since the DOD is material to the consolidated federal financial statements, these statements too get a disclaimer from the auditors. The correct statement is the DOD has failed an audit for 28 years, not 6. It's a fair point. Just because it's something that's being very publicly discussed at this point, and I'll include the actual document, the financial reports from the United States government back to 2023. And I'll also add what Catherine Austin Fitts points out, which is that ultimately ever since the first discussion of the trillions that were missing, that that what we're reporting from that point forward is inaccurate or rather unverifiable. And it's a good point to make. The point though, that it's about the reality that it's an unverifiable entity that is constantly, it's a money pit, guys. It's black ops. It's everything. And they've just dumped $1 trillion, an unprecedented number in the hands of people that are stealing from you and conducting illegal wars and, on and on and on. That's the main point. But thank you for pointing that out. That is a good point to include. Now, on the Real ID point, clearly all connecting to where this is really going, and that's the two-step part where people are getting distracted by these Bonginos of the world or whatever who hand down false information and they just take that and run. This is a real thing, and it's now happening in earnest. It's always been happening. But the point is that up until now, it's been kicked down the road, delayed. Now they're rolling this out for real. Why? Because we see what's ready. The industry is here. The time for technocracy has come. And Gnome, or, Christy Gremlin over here says, announces everyone will get a real ID to fly by May 7th. Now, the point is it's a deception in a way, but it is being driven in. Well, I'll give you my point on why I think it could go either way. But what's funny is now we've got all these reader added context. Here's what it says. This enforcement has been scheduled to take place since 2022. In fact, it's been scheduled since after since 9/11 for the most, or Patriot Act forward. So it's funny that what they're trying to do with this reader context is go, oh, it was Biden. It's just so transparent. It was all of them is the point. It's not just during everything they do is to try to couch it during Biden's last administration because they think you're that stupid or you can't have that you have the memory of a housefly and can't think past 30 seconds ago. The point is it's always been continuing and they all kick it down the road, including Trump last time until now. But it says additionally, several other forms of identification can be presented instead. Now, that is important to include because she makes it sound like that's not possible, but it may well be that that won't be possible soon. That's why I think it might not be so much of a lie as a threat, right? But let me play what she says. My post was just simply just say no. Refuse, guys. As much as it will be a hindrance. I guarantee it. I think it's still time to take a stand. As Jason Bassler said, is, what can they really do? If literally everybody just said no, what would they do? That's Larkin Rose's point. Some people will have repercussions. Eventually, whether you sit down, they're going to beat people up. Eventually their arms will get tired. If we all literally say no, they won't be able to make it happen. But that's not going to happen because partisan screamers are going to drive enough people to make it move. But here's what she said.
I'm Cristian, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security. If you plan on traveling, we need your help to prevent delays and to prove your identity. Get a real ID. Starting May 7th, you will need a real ID to travel by air or to visit federal buildings in the United States. These IDs keep our country safe because they help prevent fraud and they enhance security. Please do your part to protect our country. Go today.
Now, the point there is this is functionally no different than the other IDs they use to do the same things. The only difference is it's now national. And of course, it is very clearly a stepping stone to digital ID. It's literally in the Real ID documentation. I'll include the show on it yet again. So the argument is, as always, it keeps you safe, right? Whether it's a virus, whether it's a terrorist, whether it's, shooters, whether it's evil words, it's always the same argument. We need this to keep you safe from the thing we've manufactured. So just think about that. And the point is she's saying that you're going to have this, which I've been saying as well, because that's what they're reporting. On the list, it's saying you can't fly without this, for example. But it's important, as Catherine points out, that there's more nuance to that.
And don't delay. To learn more, go to dhs.gov/real-id. Thank you.
Yay, Homeland Security, we're your friends. So funny how much has shifted in the people that used to call everything out about the government. But just say no. Now, yes, I'll include this show again. And the reason I do that, guys, is because this show has all of the source material we've talked about. It includes links to the ID 2020 discussion, links to Real ID, like their own documentation. And we painstakingly go through each one. Like it's not, if every single time we bring something up, we have to walk back through the entire breakdown, which is probably what they want from you. It just waters down, waste time. Everything is in here for you. If you want to go further from it, please, and share it with me. The information is transparent. The title is the SAVE Act, Real ID, and ID 2020, using the two-party illusion and the election to usher in digital IDs. Now, they definitely tried to get that done before. Now it's has to pass the House, probably going to pass the Senate, which will tell you something, and Trump, I guarantee, will sign it. But so they're all really pushing back on this, like, the same old kind of like conspiracy theory game where it's like, it's just an ID, guys. Quit planning. The people that would otherwise scream that everything's a conspiracy when Biden blinks too hard are going to go, you're so silly for even pretending this is a problem. It's very weird and obvious. But make sure you check it out because the information is very real. I was engaging with somebody today with that, where it's like, my point is, it's part of the digital ID agenda. And they call you a liar or confused or you don't understand. And I'm like, well, here, the source material's right there. And they just keep pushing back, like I said before, because it's fake if I don't look at it. It seems how this game goes. But as Catherine Austin Fitts points out, this is simply not true, at least as the documentation shows now. And I'll explain what I mean by that. She says, here's the real deal on why you do not want and you do not need a real ID. Now, I agree with both of those things, even if there are repercussions, just like the COVID shot, by the way. Yeah, there were sure as hell repercussions, but I think we can look back and go, I'm really glad I didn't do that. In a technological way, same choice here. I believe that. Like not who knows how it ends up, but I'm not an injection in your body, but still something that is going to have repercussions if you follow through. And I think in the long run that you will not want. I hope I'm wrong. But here is the same little fact check. Here is the document she's talking about. Oh, wait, there it is. And it says, yes, you can fly without a real ID. Now, Americans can use one of the 15 other acceptable IDs. Now, she makes another point about this as well. The important part to understand is this has already been under attack. And it's not even just the mobile driver's license point from the Democrat side, which are two parts of the same agenda. It is about the other things, the birth certificates, the passports are already around the same conversation over the last couple of years, kind of almost in a way quietly being rushed into digitized versions. I keep telling everybody this. And so, but right now it's accurate to say, even according to the Real ID overlap, that you can use other things. So her claim that you have to have this to fly is either a threat of what will be the reality when this goes past May 7th, for example, which is the deadline, or she's just lying to you to drive you to get it. Both of those are real things to consider. Now, it says on May 7th, TSA is expected to begin 2 years of what they claim are phased enforcement. So the question is that what will happen? Or will it just be or will there be some event that they go, oh, it's crazy. Now we have to do this because of X, Y, and Z. And maybe it's a real event. Maybe it's a false flag. Who knows? That's how these things work. And if you're out there pretending false flags aren't real, then I don't know what you're paying attention to. I've never seen a time when more things like that have been straight up verified, even based on government information. But if it's a phased enforcement, it'll end up, in my opinion, just like we saw with COVID, where it'll be incentivized. You get free, jump to the front of the line. And then very quickly becomes, oh, you go to the back of the line. If you don't have it, then it becomes you're killing grandma if you don't do it, or whatever the narrative would make sense in this, to where you get, boxed out if you don't entirely follow the suit. But it says Real ID is an unconstitutional federal usurpation of states' rights. See, this is what's so funny to me, or terrifying, that you have people that are out there screaming the virtue of the Constitution and our rights, but yet don't understand it. This is a very important discussion about states' rights versus the federal government. And when they make a national ID, they're skipping right over a lot of different things. That included individual rights, as they point out. DMV's plan to digitize the Real ID on phones and with remote real-time access to it is real. So just because you have a physical ID in your hand with a star on it does not mean that this is one step in that direction. Nationalized IDs, which, by the way, the Republicans used to be the ones calling out more than anybody. That overlaps with the North American Union. All this is coming together. Where's Alex Jones and the rest who called out for years? They're literally rolling out the North American Union with Panama, Mexico, Greenland, rolling out a national ID. It's all part of the same agenda. Does a digitized national ID open the door to social credit system? Absolutely, which is what they go on to argue in this. Read it for yourself. The point is, you can see the official statements on it. And it says, excuse me, this really is a national identification card for the United States, which is crazy. For the first time in our history, we've never done this before, and we shouldn't be doing it without a full debate. So I do agree that Trump was in his last administration, kicked the can down the road. That's worth pointing out. The important point is that since this has been put forward, this administration is the first one to make it real and to actually do it. That's relevant, obviously. Now it says, I'm very, very reluctant for this country to have a national ID card. That's a senator. It says the 10th Amendment establishes the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively. And they violate this. Guys, the federal government in itself, a lot of ways, violates that directly. Or the idea of them owning land in these states. There's 1,000 ways this overlaps. Or states that want to legalize cannabis, for example, that they push back on forever, but never really did anything about. But they claim they're illegal, right? It's the same thing. Anyway, read through it. There's important points in here, but it's all the same arguments we've been making. But this is an overlap to digital ID, and it's very, very clear to see. Now, the point is this: whether or not it's going to be applicable after May 7th is the question. But as of now, her saying that you have to have it to fly does seem inaccurate based on their own information. But then Captain also points this out. There is now a push to digitize passports, which has been that way for a while. Edward Dowd says, if you have a passport, you have no problem, but this is just a ridiculous imposition on those who don't have one. And hey, maybe just start with just having an ID to vote. Right. So at the very least, he's calling out the elephant in the room, which is we don't need this to stop people voting illegally. That's the same game as always. There's laws right now that exist. They're trying to make it sound like doing this is going to be safer for you. It's like every other argument, right? There's Patriot Act, everything else stops the bad guys or whatever, the biometric wall on the border. It's because of the aliens and they're trying to hurt you. Sure, maybe that's part of it if you try to make sense of it, but the bigger picture is about you. It always has been. And you can see that by the fact that they use a different agenda every year. It was viruses before. Now it's illegal aliens. The same agenda. So what he's simply saying is, we don't need this to do what they're claiming this is for. And then he says, what's next? Digital ID? Well, yes, it's not even what's next. This is a stepping stone in that conversation. Here is just simply asking Brave, and it says, the push to digitize passports is a global initiative aimed at enhancing travel document security and efficiency. Same point. And yes, it's global. It is a great reset, World Economic Forum, Sustainable Development Goal. It's all of that. And now Trump is rolling out that part. Sure, you could pretend he doesn't know that, or you could just be honest with yourself and recognize literally everything they're doing is perfectly in line with what this is. Here is the Homeland Security page, e-passports, simply showing you that this is where it's going. They're already beginning this direction, or birth certificates. There is indeed a push to digitize birth certificates specifically in the United States. So just the fact that we know these things are happening, at some point they will become digitized, they will no longer be valid as paper. That point then, you have to have Real ID compliant ID, which will be digital, which then requires that you have one choke point to go through these, whether it's an airport, whether it's flying, whether it's walking the street. It's not hard to see this, and it's amazing the pushback we're getting. Here is a discussion from August 8th, 2023. Bill to digitize all the birth and death records in the country gets Parliament nod. Yeah, the UK. The point is to see this is not just the United States. There's a very real thing happening here. And I guess we just, in some cases, in the partisan blindness, fall into a very limited scope for what the partisanship points to, even though you were the ones calling this out from a global stage 30 seconds ago. Oh, and this is just a link. I looked it up. Here is the important one. Now, this is the bill we already talked about. This was, yes, passed under Biden, but it was a bipartisan thing. Republicans, Democrats support this. Here's the main, and it's called the Improving Digital Identity Act of 2023. It's been discussed by the Trump administration, guys. This is not a secret thing. Here's the main part for today. Read the whole thing. It's alarming. We went through it in a previous show. It says the purpose of the task force shall be to establish and coordinate a government-wide effort to develop secure methods for federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial agencies to improve access and enhance security between physical and digital identity credentials, particularly by promoting the development of digital versions of existing physical identity credentials, including driver's licenses, passports, social security credentials, and birth certificates. It's right in front of you. So when that happens, why would they continue to keep the paper? And let's be clear, they tell you in the documentation, in their public conversations, that at some point this will no longer be valid. And the TSA has already made that clear, even though they walked it back. They said that these will be mandatory at some point. They weren't supposed to say that not yet. It's in the documentation. Now here's what you're getting from the partisans. Elon Musk says, true, at least his bot response does. This is what the video, I'll just play the video. It's a long breakdown, but what you're hearing, of course, is this kind of the false binary, right? Where you get the Schumers of the world that are saying, you're going to suppress people's effort to vote, whatever, illegal aliens, which is like, who is making these arguments? I don't believe most people even, if you're arguing somebody who is an illegal alien, who's here illegally, is going to be able to vote, you're not a real person. I know very few people in the world that are actually of them. It's a crime. We all know it's a crime. You're here illegally, and citizenship is required to vote. We all know that. There's laws in the books that stop it. So, I mean, it's a fake. I genuinely think I know there are people that fall for these things, just like there are people on the right that fall for the ridiculous, unconstitutional actions they're doing. The point is the majority of people in the middle, I don't think fall for this stuff. But they give you these false binaries to make you think that's everyone's conversation. So the argument is this or the other side, and both of them are false. Here's the right side, Republican side. How did I do that? I guess I forgot this. Hold on. Or maybe I didn't. Is that the one? Hold on. Oh, it is that one. Okay, here it is.
response is Chuck Schumer is lying again when it comes to actual voting policy to protect the franchise for the American people. Number one, there's this thing called Real ID, which every state in the country now complies with, which actually protects women who go through the process of changing their name. So Chuck Schumer's lying and he's gaslighting.
Oh, okay. So it's all about protecting women, right? Whatever catch-all can you make it about? Does it help immigrants? Does it stop people from breaking the law? Does it give you candy when you jump up in the air? It's silly. Like, it's not about that. And that's ridiculous. It is not about protecting anybody. It is about tracking everyone. When is the last time your government did something like that invasively or publicly, and it turned out to help everybody? The reality is, even the NYU School of Law has called this path the road to hell. That's their own quote. And that includes this exact discussion about national IDs, about digital IDs, about the consolidation of this whole conversation. But because you point at the dumb Democrat saying the stupid thing, then you go, well, the only other choice is what he's saying, right?
People need to remember that back in, I think it was 2022, you had Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, who were up in arms when Georgia changed their voting laws, rightly, mind you, and they followed the Florida model when it came to election law. And they went down to Georgia calling it Jim Crow 2.0, and they were lying because the facts were more black people in Georgia voted in the midterm elections than in the history of the state of Georgia. So once again, the Democrats are gaslighting. They are lying. They should be joining us to protect the franchise of voting in the United States of America.
And that's the fun thing. They are. You get these token, ridiculous back and forth. But if you look at the voting, if you look at the outcome, they are all about it. And that's how it always happens. They push back like they're trying to stop, but then you get the majority of people that go along with it because it is not about what they claim it's about. Mark my words. It just passed the House. It's going to pass the Senate, I argue. And yes, I mean, the Republicans largely control all this, but at the end of the day, there are still people voting on the Democrat side in support of this. They have to, otherwise it wouldn't pass. Watch.
One thing I'll add is we've had more than 30 million people come into our country illegally. We've already seen through the work of DOGE that they have had access to register into all kind of programs.
Yeah, but see, that's in itself a gross misrepresentation. First of all, that's been going on a long time. And the idea, first of all, that this is about stopping illegal immigrants, that's nothing to do with this. There's already laws in the books. There's already processes. That is not, if they had a real ID process in this country, how would that then stop the same thing from happening? It wouldn't. The point, though, is that is a misrepresentation of a bunch of conversations. And some of those people were given legal status, whether you agree with Biden doing it or not. If Trump can just wave his hand and say Afrikaners are now have citizenship, or these illegals in farms no longer apply, it's the same stupid thing in reverse. Biden could say, then now they're legal. I disagree with both of those things. But it's funny how one is illegal and one is Trump doing what he's allowed to do. It's ridiculous, the blindness and partisanship. The idea is clearly that there were plenty of people that were allowed, whether you agree with it or not, and given legal status. And there's also people that were not even a part of that, who had social security numbers as aliens who were legally in this country who have now been declared dead by what they're doing. But you see, people who listen to this kind of media blindly take this and assume everyone's illegal because that's what they're doing and we're saving the country, and they don't look. It's always nuanced.
So all we're saying is proof of citizenship to make sure you're voting in American elections.
Well, that's already the case. So Real ID does nothing to change that. It just makes your consolidation of control and influence and surveillance over us all the more clear. You have laws right now that you're supposed to, it's the case right now. I don't know why people fall for this stuff. It's very easy to see that.
It's this common sense stuff. Once again, the Democrats simply are not serious. They would prefer to gaslight than do what's right on behalf.
Right. Dumb, bad Democrats, always lying and wrong. Deep state, they're bad. So we're right then, right? Because by default, they're bad, which makes us good. That's the only thing you need to hear from that. What they said is bad and what we do is good. Thank you for your news. It's childish. And I'm honestly of the mind that someone like that doesn't even know that. These are opportunists that are stepping into the political field because it benefits them. And they know their talking points. Maybe they bought into them for all we know. But Elon says, true, even though it's fundamentally not, but that's just because that's what he wants you to think. And down here, Rabbit Hole says, most Americans want voter ID and proof of citizenship. You mean the things that already exist? Yeah. So do we not already have voter, or rather specifically identification? Well, let me be clear about this. There are ridiculous realities right now where there are efforts from the binary ridiculous situation to argue that people don't need to. And that's ridiculous. The point is, the law already says you have to be a citizen to vote. That's the point. So if you want to talk about voter ID, then all you need to do is make sure you recognize that they're legally supposed to be a citizen, and therefore they have to verify that by showing whatever identification they already have. To argue this makes sense to make a digital ID stepping stone or a national ID that's right out of every conspiracy theory we've talked about to make that is a lie. It is simply a lie. Or proof of citizenship to vote. We already have these things. It's just not being applied, and that's how the binary works. You get the left that acts like that makes sense. You get people that are on the other side that are framed as the more logical because it is in that case. And then you side with the ridiculous real ID because the other side's obviously wrong. It's basic. It's essentially reverse psychology like we're seeing. Elon Musk, important. Bot says, DOGE designer says Democrats want to ban voter ID nationwide to turn America into a permanent one-party socialist state. It's the same old tired argument because we all know that literally everybody who's not in this country votes Republican, right? Or excuse me, Democrat. Every brown person, obviously, that's not true. I can't stop proving that to you. Every time this gets brought up, the numbers have long since been that clear. I'm willing to bet you it probably still slants in a certain direction, but who knows? The point is, it's never something you prove. There's people coming from all over the world, and we're supposed to pretend that they just all vote Democrat because what? Because these people allow them to come in the country? I mean, there's a logic point there to say, well, they let me in, but you have to realize that there's politics involved, and the world sees it far different than left and right. They see the U.S. government as murdering their families. To argue this is just illogical and not rooted in fact, in my opinion, whether slanted or not. But wanting to ban voter ID, again, that's the false binary. If you want to actually go out and listen and talk to most liberals, you're going to hear the reality of what we're talking about, the people in the middle, not the screaming partisan sides. Some of the ridiculous ones, like Schumer, would argue that we shouldn't be IDing anybody. But see, that's the same as saying, what's the good example on the other side? Which is basically saying that the law doesn't apply because we don't like it. Well, right now with the Constitution and what Trump's doing, we just disagree with that. Well, that doesn't change the law. That's how these two sides always operate. So what they're trying to tell you is, if we let them do what they're going to do, this is what Elon was saying in the beginning, that there'll never be another election because they're going to make it all Democrat. Even that in and of itself is a really illogical argument because it still wouldn't just guarantee that it's all ever Democrat. But it says the House has passed the SAVE Act, which requires proof of citizenship to vote. That's not even remotely what that's about. I mean, it is on the surface. The core point of it is the real ID identification for all of that, which you don't need. They're couching it under an obvious thing that we already have a law for. And it says, now it's up to the Senate. Contact your senator and let him know. People see a blue image like that, and that's enough. Hopefully not the majority. I believe it's not, but that would make me very sad. Greg Reese, a little bit of logic in here. First of all, Temis Massey says, real ID isn't needed and won't stop terrorists from hijacking planes. Most of the 9/11 hijackers held Saudi, UAE, Egyptian, and Lebanese passports. Now, not to get into the reality of what 9/11 was, and it definitely wasn't that. It says Real ID is a national standard and database of IDs that is primarily a tool of control for Americans. Trump should enforce it. Well, there you go. Aside from the pivot 9/11 point, he's simply making the same point we are. We already got laws in the books. You don't need that to enforce those laws. And it is a national ID that is about controlling you. Look it up. Look at the background of why they rolled this out during post 9/11, the Patriot Act. It's very transparent. And as I said, every other year, there was a new manufactured narrative for why it needed to make sense at that point. There's illegals, whether it's viruses, but now here we are. And somehow some people can't see it. Greg says Real ID one of the most important parts, is for the same digital AI system that we were told to reject from the World Economic Forum. That's what I think most conservatives do know, is you very much, we were all talking about the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, and these things were presented. And now it's happening for a different reason, but these people all support it. Bill Gates, World Economic Forum, they're all about it because it's not really about immigration. Here is In This Together pointing out the same thing, saying this is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 16.9. Look it up. The World Economic Forum has a strategic partnership with the UN to, quote, accelerate sustainable development. Presumably, The World Economic Forum is delighted the U.S. government is an enthusiastic backer of sustainable development and avidly promotes the World Economic Forum's objectives. Stay safe, America. But you see, that's not how Republicans want to see that. But it is fundamentally the reality. Look up it's the same point of the North American Union point about even the national ID. These are all segments from that same point. It's just being flavored differently so people don't see it. Jason Bassler highlights this is exactly why, in his opinion, and I agree, they waited for Trump to enforce the real ID. The deadline. His supporters will not only eagerly support it, but actively justify and defend it. Now, he just gives you a couple of examples like this, where they say, it tells me people are too busy whining about stupid SHIT and need to just go and get their effing ID. Statists, right? Blind government supporters who act like they're the rebels fighting the deep state when literally they're the ones facilitating that control. It's the same from there. Bro, real ID was just passed 20 years ago. There's no way in hell that you didn't know about safety. No, it hasn't actually been implemented, is the point, because they knew people like you at a certain point would blindly advocate for whatever they tell you you're supposed to. I agree with that. Now, this point is important to highlight that this is technically, and I looked into it to make sure is inaccurate, based on, you can see that in the DHS at least stated that Trump did this, but nonetheless, the same point. 2008, Bush delayed the real ID. 2011, Obama delayed the real ID. 2013, Obama delayed it again. 2016, Obama delayed it again. 2020, Trump delayed it. 2023, Biden delayed it. 2025, Trump is enforcing the real ID. So it matters, guys, that now it's rolling out. Now, it's not that it's about Trump alone. The point is all of them would have done it if we were at the right moment to roll it out. So I think last time with Trump was about getting this set, the table set. Here we are, and now it's being rolled out. He says, for all the Trump supporters mindlessly justifying this, read this excellent article by Derek Brose. And this is their repost of our article on the Free Thought Project. Thank you for support. There's the TLAV link right there. Real ID, voter ID, and digital ID, the future of AI, of American identification. Derek's article. One more point. Somebody commented on the comments on TLAV. He says, I went to the DMV to renew my license in Florida. And don't forget, by the way, that they're telling you, like, you better get in the line now because there's nobody, like, there's no space. It's too crowded. Everyone's trying to get it. And then you look at the numbers and it's like 30% of people have gotten it. Like, oh, so they're lying to us. I get it because nobody wants it. Same with like COVID-19 shots. We're like, you better hurry. They're going to run out. And you go and look at this. There's nobody in line. It's very manipulative. But he goes, I went to my DMV to the DMV to renew my license in Florida. The quote, real ID subject never came up. They did their bureaucratic machinations and handed me a shiny new license with the real ID badge in the corner. He said, I did not even know until later. Bad scene. He says, DeSantis is building a massive bureaucracy with massive CCP-style surveillance, like facial recognition. The big box corporate stores like Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's are also embracing facial recognition. He says, I no longer shop Walmart, and I'm currently shopping for a building materials replacement. He says 1984 was meant to be not meant to be a how-to guide. This is the Twilight Zone. Beam me up, Scotty. His point is, he goes in and just goes through the process and not even told about that. That shows me that they don't care, guys, that they want you to think it's basically that they're going to surreptitiously do this for you. This is not how this works. Even getting a license is your choice, despite the fact that it will limit what you can do. It is your choice. Or the idea that they require you have an ID in general. That's unconstitutional. The idea that you're forced to identify yourself, this is a problem. And you pay attention to how this goes. I mean, this may be the turning point for where we really need to start. I mean, whether it means you don't have a license anymore. I know most people won't want to do that. And that's the sad part about how this works, is I know most people, in my opinion, are aware of what a problem this is. But a huge portion of those would cave when it came to, well, I can't go to my favorite thing that night, or I want to go to a show, or I got to take my kids to school, and some of those, I get it. You're not required to care or act, to do what I would think is right. But it's sad that I think in a lot of cases they do agree, but just ultimately don't have the conviction to follow through. And I argue that now is the time, if it's ever going to be the time, to stand up for this, or rather stand with your principles and your convictions. Now, Jason highlights this important point. Combine the real ID. This is hopefully you can see how this will expand. This is just one example of this. Or to jump ahead slightly, things like this. Where was that? Oh, dang it. There it is. Elon Musk rolling out his with the National Reconnaissance Office. The title is "You Can't Hide. Elon Musk and SpaceX are helping U.S. intelligence build the world's largest spy satellite network." And remember what he said. The leader of the NRO. He says, "Now you can't hide because you're constantly being looked at," and saying Elon Musk is going to help us build the AI to make this work. This was going on well before Trump. So and as we keep showing you, he was a military contractor for Biden, and now he's a military contractor for Trump, and a lot more. How does that? So he was working with the deep state apparently until Trump brought him on, because that makes sense, right? Even though that's not the reality, obviously, it's all of them, or rather the real unelected power structure, whether any of the people in this government even know that. The game is Democrats, deep state. It's lazy. The point is that it relates to a lot, and the Real ID is one more stepping stone. And he says, combine the Real ID, digital ID identification point, and the Teal Ellison-backed AI surveillance infrastructure, and it's a blueprint for militarized techno-fascism. Biometric entry, AI-enforced checkpoints, and U.S. troops deployed on domestic soil. This is not freedom. Trump authorizes U.S. military to take control of land at U.S.-Mexico border. It's not a joke. And realize, guys, this even from the Posse Comitatus in general, this is not about enforcing the border. This is territory in the United States where he's deploying military, and not just the National Guard, which would give it some level of allowance. Specifics, though, and I'll maybe point it out in a second. This is wild. My point is always, imagine this was Biden. Of course, in a lot of their minds, that Biden would be wrong because he's an evil villain. Trump's doing it for us. Oh, okay. See, same point is principle. If it's bad for any reason under anybody else, it's the same point here, guys. It's not about, like, again, you could argue doing the wrong thing for the long-term right reasons. That doesn't change the fact that you would still go, that's the wrong thing. But that's what doesn't happen in many cases in the partisanship. This is a big deal. Donald Trump has authorized the military to take control of land at the U.S.-Mexico border as part of the president's broader efforts to crack down on undocumented immigration. So realize, like I said before, this is the current iteration of the justification. Plenty of them before that for other reasons. The authorization came late on Friday in a memorandum from Trump to Interior Secretary Doug Bergman, Defense Secretary Hegseth, Homeland Security Noem, and Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins. Why would the Agricultural Secretary come into that? I'm sure we're going to find out. Now, it says the memorandum entitled Military Mission for the Sealing of the Southern Border of the United States and Repelling Invasions, which I've included for you to read. It says, allows the U.S.'s armed forces to, quote, take a more direct role when it comes to securing the boundary in question. Now, one of the arguments that people will make is that through executive order, you can give yourself this wiggle room. But this is my point about the Constitution. The idea that we can just continue to dictate by just the power structure going, I wrote this down, therefore. I mean, we're so far away from anything we ever pretended we were. And what this is doing is creating a justification for them to literally deploy military domestically, which has always been a big deal from the founding fathers forward, and do so because of people coming across the border that they've manufactured, that Israel's a part of. It's very clear to me. And the sidestep would argue that ultimately they can help, actually, I think it's in the article before I get to it. I forget, it might be one of the next ones, but the point is that how it goes matters and who and what they're actually doing. But my point is the main point is just simply deploying them in the first place. But it says the memorandum added that the Department of Defense should be given jurisdiction to federal lands, including the Roosevelt Reservation, a 60-foot wide strip that stretches over California. So understand, guys, that's whether it's a 60-foot strip or not, that's American territory on the side of the United States. That's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. It's very clear. But my point, the point though, jurisdiction to federal lands. So remember what I said. I this is not my opinion. It's pretty clear. I think obviously that the federal government having land is it's unconstitutional. The Bureau of Land Management in and of itself is a problem. I honestly think the federal government is one of the first things that we should get rid of. But my point is, that is what they're telling you basically, because we already have this violation in place, therefore we can just grab that. But that's based on something I already argue is unconstitutional. But it goes across California, Arizona, New Mexico. What does that mean for people in those areas? What if your property is right up against that 60-foot area? It says doing that would give troops stationed there the legal right, they claim, and I argue it's not, this is an illegal right, to detain immigrants accused of trespassing on what in effect is an elongated base. So basically you have a U.S. military base being built along the border, is by default the argument. And it says, and unauthorized immigrants would be held in custody until they could be turned over to immigration agents. That is one of the most obvious points of violation. Whether deployed illegally or not, the argument is that if they are there under some wiggle room, that they would simply have the authority to help and surveil and have intelligence. And then the immigration enforcement would be the ones doing so, Border Patrol. And the fact that they're simply just going, no, that this is military deployed on the ground in our country who are going to be arresting people in the United States. Everything about this is wrong. Because also, let's realize, again, you don't need this to do what they're trying to do. You already have people that could be in. This is taking a step further in the direction of the authoritarian agenda that we see playing out, whether it's unconstitutional actions, threatening to send Americans overseas, it's all right there. Military activities that could be carried out on federal land include border barrier construction and emplacement of detection and monitoring equipment. Oh, good. After 45 days, the Defense Secretary Hegseth will assess the initial phase of the order, but of course, in a time, he could extend the amount of federal land included in the memorandum. Yeah, so let's talk about mission creep, okay? Let's talk about the 100-mile, well past that now, border zone what do they call it, non-constitutional zone? Hold on. See, that pops up. Yeah, look at that. Brought it up so many times in the past. ACLU, but it's widely discussed. The Constitution-free zone, that's what we called it. The Constitution in the 100-mile border zone. The point is, guys, that you can literally see let's see. I just want to get an image for you. One will pop up. Yeah, okay. So check this out. And this is also from the ACLU. Let me give you that link right there. Just do both of them. So if you recognize already, and this has been a long time this has happened, that there's already a 100-mile border zone under the guise of immigration all the way around the country, where this is not a joke. They claim the Constitution doesn't exist. It's a Constitution-free zone where the right, basically because we have illegal. And so look at Maine, for example. How are you going to argue that the entire state of Maine exists in a limbo where certain constitutional rights, or all of them when they decide, simply don't exist? It's not just unconstitutional. It is, I mean, I don't think there's a word strong enough in my opinion. This has been the rapid decline of what we even pretend we are at this point. And that's what's happening now even further. Now, this is another mission creep point, right? Where we just said that they already pointed out that they can just extend the amount of land should they want to. Here we go. And that's going to be a situation where they extend that point. Now, it says Friday's order is the latest step from Trump in his administration's ongoing focus on immigration enforcement, which has involved declaring a national emergency on the southern border. But see, this is what's crazy. They declared that under the guise of immigration and then used it for something entirely different, because it's just a national emergency, just like we saw during COVID-19. It says the DHS's announcement was widely seen as a workaround of the Posse Comitatus Act, a federal law that bars U.S. military troops from participating in most civilian law enforcement actions. Very, very obvious what's going on. Include that for you. Now, let's ask Grok. Is it illegal to deploy the U.S. military to the border? Deploying U.S. military to the border is not inherently illegal, but it's governed by specific laws and restrictions. Now, I argue that this, when you get into the nuance, that's where, which is not, I mean, you could, like, it's like the free speech point. Right now, it is, we argue, even though that's not what's being, it's not the reality, that you have free speech. You could say what you want. But plenty of people out there argue that that shouldn't be allowed. Even, I mean, I think right now, even especially to Republicans, but it's both the partisans for different reasons, argue that you can't, anti-Semitism, pronouns, whatever it is. And they want limited speech, even though they don't really say that sometimes. Some of them do. My argument is always that, well, I flatly disagree with you, but give me your argument. Why should that be the reality? So in this case, my point is that you can get into the nuance of executive orders and kind of mission creep of our laws over the years that are slowly removing the Constitution. The point is that I say from the very origin point of the Constitution that deploying military in any way in the country is unconstitutional. But there's been slow moves in that. National Guard changes something, or if it's different states, or, and now the same point where he just signs an executive order yesterday or whenever it happened and saying that this is different now because it's an emergency, because of the border. All of that is why there's nuance to this in this report. My point is, if you really understand the fundamental reality, I think it's a problem from the beginning. But it goes on to say, governed by specific laws and restrictions. Repugnant to the Constitution, null and void. That would be my argument always. But the Posse Comitatus Act limits the military's role in domestic law enforcement, prohibiting active duty forces from directly enforcing civilian laws. Now, remember, for the podcast, this is Grokk's response. Doesn't mean it's all accurate or, question everything. It says, like immigration control, for example. All right, so they're not allowed. That's explicitly just stated by Grokk. The one thing they use as an example that they're not allowed to enforce, like civilian laws, like immigration control. So it's funny that the one thing Grokk points to is the one thing they're going to use it for. And it says, unless explicitly authorized by Congress or the Constitution. Well, not Constitution does not. So you could argue that Congress could then somehow, I would argue that would also be unconstitutional, because the Constitution is the foundational point in this, whether Congress passes a law or not. That is Mayberry versus Madison. Nonetheless, the argument is that either of those things could allow it. Neither of those things have happened. It says, however, the military can provide support in non-enforcement, like logistics, surveillance, infrastructure assistance. That's not what they're going to do. That's what you could read it in Trump's own executive order, or the general reality of what they're claiming, that they're going to be apprehending people. That's their own words. As seen in past operations under administrations of both parties, basically saying those things are, the wiggle room. It says, for example, National Guard troops, I've pointed this out in the past, when activated under state control. See, that's the important difference. So a state governor, for example, can say, I need National Guard to stop whatever. They've used it typically to go after protests very, very dangerously. Nonetheless, it's only the states. So you can't justifiably say we need it all along the border unless you're going to literally have to communicate from the different parts of the different states and how they operate in their areas. I guarantee that's not going to happen. But so that's how that would apply, and they've already abused that in the past. It says that basically National Guard, when activated in their states, can assist border security without violating Posse Comitatus. But again, there's that nuance. If you really want to go back to the original point, I argue that already does. But it says, as they're not subject to the same federal restrictions. Federal troops under Title 10 can also be deployed for specific missions if authorized by Congress, like disaster response, counter-drug operations. But see, my point is you don't need the military to do that. And especially since you're stopping average people who want to help from actually helping all the time. But it says, but direct apprehension of civilians is off limits without congressional approval. That's the point, guys. So pretty clear to me. And they're already planning to violate that. Read it for yourself. Now, of course, Alex Jones comes out and goes, yay, it's all the best thing in the world. President Trump just authorized what we just explained for you, the Roosevelt Reservation. He says this triggers the 60-foot buffer zone on a 700-mile stretch of our border will now be considered military property, and troops can seize illegals to hand to Border Patrol. So I just read for you directly from what Grokk said, directly from the law, directly from even. So what he's saying is, I don't care that what they're doing is illegal. I don't care that what they're doing violates the Constitution or that it violates the law in general. Because, yay, Trump is the best. Why don't people call these people out? Military property? I mean, you have to realize that this is the whole point. You can take this one step at a time and realize the fact that the only reason this is even happening is because federal government has already seized land illegally. These people don't care. Translation, he says, his opinion, he just activated the military to completely shut down the invasion of our border. Oh, because you're framing it as the war that we're in. Ignoring the weaponized immigration that Israel's absolutely facilitating, ignoring the immigration that comes because of your clumsy foreign policy that you clearly support. All that aside, somebody rightly points out down here, whatever it was, what about all of that? It's like, so either they're going to have another narrative for why that becomes the case, or it's a mission creep point where they go, well, obviously now that's open. They're just going there. Now we need that part too, until it becomes everywhere. You get the point. If this was Obama, if this was Biden, do you think Alex would be going, we did it? Get rid of the bad guys. Hardly. Even if it was literally identical. And Biden was like, we got to get rid of illegal immigrants. How much you want to bet Alex would be saying violation of the Constitution? You can't deploy military. Posse comitatus. But not now. And of course, let's not forget the North American Union discussion, right? The obvious of what this all is. Like, let's go back to that really quickly. Like, let's realize all these things have weirdly pivoted, but are still continuing, right? We're going to talk about Panama Canal next, or the Canada conversation, the Mexico, the Greenland conversation. Like, all these things in a weird way have continued in their own right. Here's the Mexico overlap, but now it's for something different, though. But now you can see how this is building. Trump has been leaning into the potentially he threatened military action against Mexico already. So my point is, do not forget how clearly this overlaps with exactly what this is. And as I said back then on January 8th, 2025, as Israel's globalist ambitions become clear, team sport Republicans like Alex endorsed the North American Union, despite calling it out for half their career. Here is the Panama overlap. Same conversation, really. It's all part of the same agenda. Globalism, it all dovetails together. She said, and the point, in case you haven't seen it, is BlackRock apparently now owns the Panama Canal. Like, that's not a big deal, right? Can you imagine if BlackRock and anything else ever happened? They'd be going, BlackRock Global is bad guy. But of course, when, he is working with Rumble or buys part of Elon Musk's company or support Donald Trump, it's like, whoa, blah, blah, blah. We don't see it. Right? That's okay, though, because unity, team unity, except any other time it happens, it's bad. It's just straight up hypocrisy. And remember, we talked about this back during the COVID-19 dynamic. But Donald Trump allowed BlackRock to basically buy out this government's treasury. The COVID coup, the BlackRock takeover of American interests. It already happened. And now it's going even further. And it's not just outside of this, it's inside this country. BlackRock is immersed with all of this, guys. It's amazing the limited conversation from people that would call it out in every other context. That's why conservatives see this, because they're not stupid. They recognize BlackRock's a problem, and then they see it here, and they go, but why aren't you calling it out? In fact, you're supportive of it over here. How does that make sense? Gen X Girl says, is pressuring Panama to force Hong Kong billionaire-owned C.K. Hutchinson to sell to Zionist-controlled BlackRock a win for Americans? I think not. But U.S. taxpayers are paying for the increased military that Trump has sent to Panama to force the sale, which is basically what happened. This is 2025's banana wars, with BlackRock expanding its monopoly over transit ports from airports in Malaysia to the Panama Canal. We'll get to Ecuador in a second. We already know what's going on in El Salvador, definitely, but in Honduras, it's happening all over around us. I keep trying to highlight this larger technocratic overtaking, and it dovetails or overlaps with Zionism, with the U.S. agenda. It's very clear. And she just highlights this, saying, this is a thread about the changeover. This was on the 6th of March. BlackRock secures $23 billion deal for Panama Canal ports. Now, this is not, I was really broad right there. This specifically is about these ports. Not the Panama Canal overlap is important, but it says on March 4th, Hong Kong-based C.K. Hutchinson Holdings, an American investment company, BlackRock Inc., along with Global Infrastructure Partners and Terminal Investment Limited, jointly announced a massive $23 billion deal for the acquisition of 90% stake in Panama Ports Company, which operates the ports of Balboa and Cristobal, which is very relevant and important, and basically is part of the conversation of the Panama Canal conversation, or doubled up on that, but it's the same point. And we'll go over to this next in these articles. But it says in 1999, the Panama Canal has been managed, or since 1999, managed by the Panama Canal Authority, an autonomous entity of the Panamanian government. However, the ports of Balboa and Cristobal at the canal's Pacific and Atlantic entrances, respectively, have been operated by C.K. Hutchinson's Holdings. So basically sandwiches it. It says President Trump and U.S. officials have expressed concern about China's influence over the port. So the new agreement could give the U.S. more control over the famous 51-mile shipping lane. So now you get the point of that, because it is effectively the same conversation. So BlackRock has stepped in yet again with Trump's allowance, or the other way around, however you want to look at it. So here, and also, so don't forget, Trump allows BlackRock to take over parts of this country during 2020, and BlackRock has invested in XAI, which now owns Twitter, and already did. That's the reality. And let's not forget, that XAI is a DARPA program, sort of like Total Information Awareness became Palantir. DARPA's XAI program allegedly ended in 2019. So many months later, Elon Musk buys Twitter, turns it to X. Right after that, starts XAI. And then XAI buys Twitter. So you're simply watching a very rapid succession. It's obvious. I went over it in the show. You can see it for yourself. And so now effectively just another DARPA program that's influencing your everything at this point for where this goes. And BlackRock is a part of that. Surprise, surprise. Why is that not being called out? Well, NBC News, Trump was touting his Panama victory, then China stepped in. Now this is April 8th to see how the kind of escalation of this, right? So March was when BlackRock was doing that discussion. April 8th, basically Trump is making this deal. China kind of sticks its fingers in it. Now it says in Hong Kong, reporting a huge deal President Trump touted as victory in his campaign to take back the Panama Canal from China, even though that was not the reality, could be on the rocks amid pushback from Beijing. Now it says the $23 billion sale involving two ports run by C.K. Hutchinson, a private company based in the Chinese territory of Hong Kong, to a consortium led by the U.S. investment firm BlackRock had been scheduled to be signed last week, right? So you have BlackRock acquiring these central ports, and now you've got a consortium led by BlackRock essentially funding the money to buy or to basically control the in and out of this whole dynamic. Now it says, but an agreement between the two has been delayed under pressure from China, whose market regulator launched a review of the deal as state-run newspapers attacked it as undermining China's national interests. Now, important to recognize that, is that not the exact argument from the U.S. government, right? That our national security is why you can't be here. And China's saying, well, our national security is why you can't be there, or whatever. Not even that actually is why we have to be there. So it's an interesting difference to point out, because clearly the U.S. government is still utilizing these waterways. So the point is that China has not restricted their pathways at all, it appears. China does not have military personnel deployed in Panama in regard to the Panama Canal, or I don't think anywhere in Panama. But what we're going to get into is that's exactly what the U.S. is going to now do. Build bases, deploy troops. So this is what I'm always trying to show you. In no way am I ever arguing that China is not abusing deals and strong arming like everybody else. I'm not saying I can prove anything in this exact situation, but I would argue it's very logical to assume that. Consider it anyway. But what you end up seeing is them pointing at just China being present and often working with making deals that let's say Panama or in Africa, the people there want. They sign these agreements, right? As opposed to them threatening military action, strong-arming Panama into signing a deal that's seemingly not in their interest, and they've stated is not what they want, right? And then on top of that saying, but for your protection, for your sovereignty, we're going to deploy our military that will never leave, like with Iraq. So is that really their free and control and sovereign? Or is now the U.S. government pointing at boogeyman China to take advantage of the situation and become the boogeyman? Whether China was ever actually that for Panama. Now, we'll go through this. You can read for yourself. Don't hear this as China good guy. I don't think that. But it's important to see how weird it is that they frame this in a cartoonish way when they then fill the role exactly like they claim China was going to, even though they didn't. Now it says, going forward, the U.S., quote, will not allow communist China or any other country to threaten the canal's operation or integrity. Okay, where was that happening? Honest question. Please demonstrate for me where that was actually happening. Not the maybe we'll come down the line or China bad guys so we can't let them be there because will do something. Where did it happen? Where were they threatening the operation of the canal or the integrity of the canal or in any way restricting shipping for anybody, including Americans? Not that I can see. It says China, which says it has never interfered in the operation of the canal, called Hegseth's remarks irresponsible. Now, please do your own due diligence. I look quite hard to find those. I'm thinking there's probably some example, right? It's where there's some kind of a conflict, kind of a confrontation where something. No, I can't find anything that shows China in any way hindered anything. I mean, or that they're even like the U.S. is going to be and already is like stationed there, dictating action. I see China being represented in some kind of overlap, especially with the ports, right? But not for the canal. So please, if you find more, send it to me. I think it's very easy to see that this is just more bluster from people that basically want what they pretend they're doing, even though they're not doing it. So they are the authoritarian occupier when they're going bad guy and pointing at everybody else and then seriously fill that role. Now, to be clear, again, I think all governments are in that category. So basically, they're all just competing with each other to be the one who gets to take advantage of somebody. Just recognize that leading that charge seems to be the United States government. It says, we advise the U.S. to reflect on its own bullying and plundering of developing countries in Latin America, like the Caribbean, including Panama, and stop distorting and slandering China. That's the spokesperson for China said. Panama also denies Trump's accusations about the neutrality of the canal, which is enshrined in its constitution. Basically, Trump has just been constantly screaming about how it's a bad deal and it's ours, and just more authoritarian, unilateral action that has nothing to do with the reality of the situation or the law. Now, whether it's a bad deal is not the point. This is a long time ago, and the reality has been set for quite a long time. And that's why they threatened and pushed and cajoled, and this is what they do. Says C.K. Hutchinson's sale to BlackRock includes a 90% interest in the 2 Panama Canal ports, so they control them, and an 80% controlling interest in 43 other ports outside Hong Kong and China. So all this really amounts to is BlackRock swinging in and dramatically taking control of the situation. Which, I mean, is that the U.S.? Is it Israel? Or is it just a shadow bank, as they call it, just taking control? You know, the point is, it's not at all what before this happened, this was not the reality. So they used the claim of bad guy China to basically take advantage of the situation. When the deal was announced on March 4th, the company said definitive documentation for the Panama Canal operations would be signed by April 2nd. Now it says China firmly opposes using economic coercion and bullying to harm other countries' legitimate rights and interests, said their Foreign Affairs Ministry. Now, look, I find it hard to believe that they wouldn't be totally willing to do that when it served their interests. Maybe I'm wrong. And I say that because I don't see a lot of examples of them doing that. Like where you can straight up go, here's an example. Historically, we now know for sure. Like there's a lot of bluster and claims about what they do in other places, but I look into it and you can see agreements made with countries, but doesn't always mean they were. I mean, I think they strong arm like everybody does. But you can look at the actual content and recognize that it's not them going, we're protecting you, so just shut up like U.S. does and then take everything. But they're making agreements that do in some way benefit the countries. In this case, there was not military. They were simply a self-serving agreement. For the ports in particular, I don't even think the Panama Canal in at large, that was Panama. And so they're saying, we don't agree with that. Maybe that's the case. And look, as I've said over the years, there's a very obvious opportunistic reason, let's just say they're all the same, to play that role. Like right now with Israel, like even before with the genocide of Israel right now, or genocide Israel's conducting, I said the same thing before that the U.S. has been so rampantly lawless and so ridiculous that it behooves Russia, for example, at the time, to not be that way, to at least, whether they are or not, and I would argue if that was the case, to pretend to be the guy that counterbalances what the U.S. is doing because it gives you a lot of political clout, right? So whether you agree that's the way they are or not, you have to understand that this might be a tactic to go, look, and maybe that continues because they wanted, who knows? Just recognize that you can't verify what they're claiming they're doing, and you can very surely see what U.S. is doing. Now it says, for Panama, the deal's failure, quote, would be seen as snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Nevertheless, some analysts say C.K. Hutchinson, which is not financially dependent on the Chinese government, is expected to press ahead with the deal, which does seem to have happened. Here's the deal. Of the 11th, that's 2 days ago, U.S. signs deal with Panama to secure Canal. And, of course, from their perspective, deter China's malign influence, which, again, I'd love to see what you mean by that. Not just that we know China's bad, like they tend to be childish about it these days, but, what is actually happening? What is the so-called malign influence that they've had on Panama? I mean, really, I would genuinely like to see a fleshed-out argument for what they think happened. I'll report it. Tell me what you think. Because what I'm arguing is that, from what I can see, is that's just them going, terrorist, bad guy. And so they just lurch into what they want using the justification that they were the bad guy, like they're doing with everything everywhere. Here's what the article says. The United States is partnering with Panama as part of efforts to secure the Panama Canal and counter the Chinese Communist Party's malign influence in the region, according to Hegseth. U.S. and Panamanian officials signed a memorandum of understanding on bilateral security matters in the region that will help expand joint training exercises between the two countries and improve overall interoperability between their military forces. Oh, I see. So it kind of has nothing to do with the canal other than your control of the area. And now you're using that to insert your military agenda in Panama, where China wasn't doing that, at least not that we can prove. It goes on to say the agreement will also reestablish a rotational joint presence at a handful of previously operational military bases that they weren't using, but now they're going back, including Rodman Naval Station and Howard Air Force Base, as well as for us. So they're growing their military footprint all around the world by pointing at everybody else, claiming they're doing the same when they're not. You show me one other country that's doing it like U.S. is right now. The world looks like a chicken pox when you look at the bases the U.S. government has all around the world, right along the borders of all their enemies, and they go, you're the one, everywhere. It says Hegseth noted the jungle operations that would be revived as an operations center so the U.S. and Panamanian troops could train side by side. Hooray! Look, you could show that Panama doesn't want this. Officials also plan to sign a separate declaration related to the security and operation of the Panama Canal, would provide a framework for U.S. warships and auxiliary ships to travel first and free through the canal. Oh, okay. So already had free passage, but now it is first. Right. So you're just, I guess, jumping to the front of the line because you're in power. That seems very accurate and for what you typically are, if that's what that even means. But and I will take one step back to be clear. From what I see, it's the leadership of the government that are speaking out mostly about not wanting this. There's people in this country that at least profess to want this, but I think it's the usual oligarchy interest that you get that want what the U.S. brings for their special oligarchy circle. And, it's like the Iran, the Operation Ajax and the Iranian, when they overthrew Iran back in the, I forget the exact year, but they had the revolution in the 70s. The point is that after the overthrow of Iran, they try to pretend like it was, so nice. But no, it was a small group, Pahlavian is the little oligarch circle where they got treated like they got everything. They were wealthy, but the rest of them in that country were suffering. And you can easily prove that. And that's why the country stood up and pushed back. The point is that that's what you can see in this conversation. That there's got to be people there that are going to go, I want what the U.S. will give me at the expense of everybody else. And they'll act like it's freedom. But it says the agreements will see the two nations expand their security relationship when it comes to information sharing, enhanced cyber cooperation, bilateral security dialogues, and canal infrastructure improvements. So, they're just sticking their fingers in everything now, which is not what China appeared to be doing. It says the era of capitulating to coercion by the communist Chinese is over. You see what I mean? So you're literally coercing all of this, and you're claiming that the age of capitulating to what China seems to have not been doing there is over, because the screamers are going to say that as the reality. We just saved Panama is what they're going to say. He also said that the Chinese regime's, quote, growing and adversarial control of strategic land and critical infrastructure in this hemisphere cannot and will not stand. Oh, you mean so literally what you're doing everywhere in the world is not okay for anybody else? Yes. And maybe you agree with that because you somehow childishly think that they're spreading freedom. It's just hypocrisy. And they're not spreading freedom. It says, speaking at a ribbon-cutting event at the Vasco Nunez de Baloba Naval Base on April 8th, Hegseth said that China-based companies were still controlling critical infrastructure at the canal area, appearing to allude to Hong Kong-based the port companies that BlackRock is buying. It says he said, gives the communist regime a potential to conduct surveillance activities across Panama. So basically, he's already building the narrative for why they push this deal, because they can't allow China to do what they do everywhere. Which, sure, I would argue I don't want China spying on me just as much as I don't want the U.S. spying on me. The point is the same thing. He says, and makes Panama and the United States less secure, less prosperous, and less sovereign. That's stupid. Less sovereign. That's the inaccurate way to even use that. These people it's like saying, it doesn't, there's all these different, it's like pretending that you have limits to your rights, that kind of thing. It's not, you're either sovereign or you're not. And what they're saying is that they're making this less secure by doing what we do every single day all around the world. In response, I should say the government. In response, Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson accuses the United States of bullying and sabotaging the regime's cooperation with Panama. Of course, they call it the regime. The point is that you're talking about the Chinese government. who already had agreements with Panama, and they step in and just shatter the whole thing for their interest alone at the expense of literally everybody. Typical U.S. foreign policy. C.K. Hutchinson, which has announced plans to sell its controlling stake in the ports to the consortium backed by BlackRock, denied those allegations on April 9th. So, to finish on this point, let me actually do one thing, just a random thing I have to do really quickly. Let me play this clip really quick. Let's see. See if something relevant. We just talked about this guy.
Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories.
Did you buy his confidence with true stories?
You buy his confidence and set him up. We've seen this happen recently with Jack Anderson, for example.
Thank you for your patience. Rare that I have to get up in the middle of these, but didn't prepare properly beforehand. Not to be too personal, but the point here is this is the kind of the framing of this. The U.S. recognizes their sovereignty over the canal, but this is the kind of game they always play. By simply saying that, and what's important in this article is that they actually cite what the Panamanian government is pointing to, that they were coerced in this and they don't agree with this. The point is that they simply, it's even worse, that they claim that Hegseth to them in their meetings swore that they would control it. They have sovereignty. But yet when they put out their statement, they leave that part out. So I think you already know where this goes, that they tell them what they want to hear and then take whatever they want, sort of like with the Kurds or anybody else they've ever dealt with. Typical U.S. foreign policy. And that's in no way a knock on Americans. It's a knock on the government that pretends to represent Americans, even though far too many Americans seem to support them. It says the Panamanian government has strongly rejected U.S. allegations the key waterway is controlled by China. So first point, the very government that they're claiming to save from China is going, they didn't control this, because you can pretty much prove that wasn't the reality. It says, but to be fair, the ports, just like I make the point with BlackRock, it very much does have that influence, but BlackRock is also overlapped with the actual dynamic of the U.S. government and the canal itself. So they're basically just got it on lock now, completely. And I'm willing to bet you anything that will be coercively used against governments they don't like, or people that criticize Israel, right? I mean, or using this to somehow find a way to circumvent what Yemen is doing. Like, that's what this seems to be about. But they're telling you China did not do that. Maybe they're lying. Consider for yourself, though. The evidence matters, and I don't see it there. It says, but current and former U.S. officials and experts say the United States has legitimate security concerns. Of course they do. Our own people tell us that we're correct. That's shocking. And it says, including that ports and other infrastructure held by China could be used for espionage. Yeah, of course. So too does everybody. I mean, but except you don't care when Israel does it. Israel literally gets caught with Stingray devices at the White House and nobody cares. That's just a side point. The reality is the U.S. government's spying on everybody, and China's doing the same. So it doesn't make it all just benign. The point, though, is that it's just funny for them to make that case when it's obviously what they all know they're doing to each other. It says, during Hegseth's visit, the U.S. and Panama issued joint statements about deepening security cooperation. But the English language version, published by the Pentagon, so it's a deliberate choice, did not include a sentence that was in the Spanish language version, published by Panama, that spoke specifically about their sovereignty over the canal. So if you were the Panamanian government at this point, you'd be like, okay, we're getting screwed. I mean, it's obvious, especially since you know what this government has done. And it says, the sentence reads, in addition, Secretary Hegseth recognized the leadership and inalienable sovereignty of Panama over the Panama Canal and its adjacent areas. Now, Trump screams something opposite. So that's hilarious to me. Or I shouldn't even say hilarious. It's just unfortunate that it's so exactly what I would expect. So he again tells them they want to hear, and then they put out their version that does not include that. speaking about limiting sovereignty when that's, same kind of thing. It says, asked whether he recognized Panama's sovereignty, here's how he responded. We certainly understand that the Panama Canal is in Panama, and protecting Panamanian sovereignty from malign influence is important. Come on, guys. I could have done better than that. That's his way of saying no. We understand that it's in Panama and it's a canal and there's definitely water in there. Does that answer your question? No, not at all. In fact, you completely sidestepped it and we all saw that. It's very ridiculous. Again, if you're Panama, you'd be like, yeah, this is obviously they're not going to abide by what they secretly told us in that meeting. Now it says, and we're grateful that they've welcomed U.S. troops on Panamanian soil by invitation through rotational joint exercises. Again, that's the same response. Had nothing to do with the question. So it's in Panama and they let our troops in. So what else matters? Basically what his response was. By invitation, you mean by coercion, which is what they're going to say. Panama's Ministry for Public Security, Frank Abrego, said Panama would not allow permanent military bases, even though that's exactly what they just said they want to do. And that's what Hegseth said they're going to get. Every time it goes this way. Secretary Hegseth in the meeting we had in private, this quote, Hegseth in the meeting we had in private recognized the sovereignty of Panama over the Panama Canal. That's not what he said when they asked him, as we just showed you. While Hegseth spoke about working with Panama to remove malign Chinese influence, Trump has spoken in broader terms and not ruled out using military force. Now remember, this was on the 9th. The point is that's at least seems to have been avoided. And look, if you're Panama, I argue basic understanding of this, really, you realize that you can't stand against the United States military power and that you don't have necessarily enough alignments with people out there, unless I'm missing something, to be able to defend you against what they do. So they go, hey, we're going to bomb you if you don't do what we want. They go, damn it. Okay, then fine. Trying to get out of here. It's like that's not reluctantly giving in because then that is what might makes right looks like. That is what peace through strength looks like from the U.S. government. I just can't stress this enough, guys. This is very, very obvious. Now, last point to talk about, very important, the same damn thing. I'm willing to bet you could find more examples of this right now in many different countries around the world. That's usually how this goes. It's just some of these get kind of seen, called out by certain outlets, usually independent media. Some of them happen quietly and you get wind of it when it gets larger, right? But this is constantly happening. This is like a chess game where they're constantly moving their pieces into place. That's geopolitics. And Israel and the United States are the most rampant and illegal and violent players. It's very easy to see. It's right on the surface. They don't even give you good enough narratives anymore. So here, as Ryan Grimm points out, the U.S. desperately wants the banana scion with narco links to win today's election in Ecuador. Jake Johnson says blatant election interference from the Trump administration ahead of tomorrow's vote, and the vote's today, in Ecuador. A desperate attempt at the last-minute shift as betting and bond markets are heavily favoring the opposition. Let's do this really quickly, in case it might have been... Oh, here, hold on. Let me just look real quick and see. See if we got a result or if something has happened. I doubt it'd be done by now, but I'm curious if there's any indication. There we go. Okay, let's see. It's saying their elections are held on the 9th. The elections also include the selection, first round of voting. Oh, here, sorry. I could show you this. I'm just looking at Wikipedia real quick. It looks like it's not necessarily done yet, which was what I expected, but it looks like it's at least somewhat close, 44-44. Yeah, so it says Ecuador's conservative incumbent and a leftist lawyer are leading. Now, of course, watch as this plays out. You're going to see, in my opinion, Elon Musk, I almost guarantee it's going to step in and call this a leftist Democrat coup or something like that and go after it saying the deep state has taken over Ecuador. It's going to be these lazy arguments that Netanyahu and Trump and them all using wherever it fits their narrative or their needs, their desires. And the point is, this is not the same left and right thing you see in this country. There's definite overlaps. The point is, this is about somebody who is pushing back In my opinion, but please look for yourself on the larger thing we're talking about, right? Just like we saw with Panama. You have a person that, whether he's enriching himself in his own ways or not, that's why, you know me, I'm a pessimist when it comes to government, is in some ways at least leaning into the more what people would want, sort of like a Maduro, a Gaddafi. They're all, or Evo Morales. And I'm not saying all those people are necessarily good. I'm just saying that you could see that even on top of whatever you might argue is bad, they were doing things that definitely benefited the average people in their countries. So this is an early lead. Now watch as this gets manipulated, guys. And that's the larger point. Blatant election interference from the Trump administration ahead of the vote. So they were doing this before the votes were tallied. And I guarantee you're still doing it now. So here, this is the report from the 11th. The U.S. intelligence report favors incumbent Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. I think it's Noboa. Now, and basically the point is that the report they put out are saying that they want a very certain person to be put back in place. Yeah, I'm just making sure this. I'll read through this later. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this is an older one, I think. That's weird. It's strange. That pops up. Oh, yeah, that is. Well, see, this is what I get so frustrated about with these search results. I just seen this over here. Let me find one so I can correct that really quickly. Here, let's do this. Oh, here. Brave's giving us something. Okay, Ecuador held its presidential runoff election April 13th. That's today, with incumbent President Daniel Noboa and leftist. That's why I thought that was accurate. Leftist lawyer Luis Gonzalez competing for the presidency. So to be clear for the podcast and anyone watching, Daniel Noboa, or however you pronounce that, that's the one the U.S. government wants, and I'll show you why. I mean, my opinion, but I mean you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And then you have Gonzalez, who is competing, who arguably is the one more supported by the people who want, basically, but again, looking for yourself. That's not the point of the conversation right now. Now it says, as of today, polls have closed and the initial results are expected to be announced later tonight. Turnout, it says 84%. Wow, that's a pretty high turnout. Like even in this country, we get like 40 something or even lower than that. Same thing. Remember, I don't go into other points. We're getting close to 3 hours, but just make a point about historical discussions about them using percentages to discount results, even though they have usually lower than that in the Western world. Incumbent president conservative saying he won 44% of the votes in the first round. So it looks like that Noboa might be the one currently getting more. That we'll come back to it. If you see results, let me know in the chat. So the point though is to get into this. Not necessarily the outcome, but consider what that might have changed if the outcome may be different because of what they've been doing up until now. An American intelligence assessment of the Ecuadorian presidential election set for Sunday, today, and concluded that a re-election of the incumbent president would better serve U.S. national security interest over the challenger. So, I mean, can you think about this? If this was Russia or anybody else, just simply putting out a report saying that we would rather have this than that, they have done similar. They would call it interference, election meddling, whatever. And it goes much further than the report, guys, because there's very clear action taking place. Or the point to China, when they go our national security interest, and they go, well, that we don't care about that. Well, it's the same difference. Why does your national security interest supersede everybody else's sovereignty? It doesn't, to be clear, but they pretend it does. Just like, interesting parallel, just like Israel pretends that their international law does not bind them. They've said this publicly more than once in their Knesset, like the Congress, that basically the international law does not stop them. They can legislate. The direct quote was, "We can legislate anywhere in the world." Just make sure you understand what that shows you for the way the world is playing out today. And here they are doing the same thing. It says the assessment comes as the Trump administration mulls establishing a permanent U.S. military presence in the South American country. You starting to see a pattern here? Really, it's a pattern that's been going on for decades, but very clearly right now. Once known as the Island of Peace to help, guess what? Trump's argument? To help battle violent gangs. Now, basically, guys, this is the new terrorism. Like that's, for now anyway. Violent gangs are the thing that's got everybody, it's all about MS-13 and Tren de Aragua. It is just the claim of terrorism in another form. We need to establish bases because gangs. 30 seconds ago, it was terrorism. It's the same point. Wait, did I not go further on that? Maybe I did stop on that. Hold on, let's read a little bit further. The U.S. this is what I wanted to get into. We'll go next, though. The U.S. intelligence assessment completed days ago concluded that a win for Noboa on Sunday's election against Gonzalez would better serve their interests. And why that should even matter? It's crazy. On the negotiating table, Noboa's pitch to the Trump administration last month, see how this works, to put a U.S. military base in Ecuador, according to U.S. intelligence officials with knowledge of the assessment who spoke to CBS News under the condition of anonymity. You got to love how that always goes. Intelligence spooks told us you don't get to know who, how often, and just like the CIA guy just told you, half the time that's false, and they report it anyway. It says, amid deepening political divisions and rising urban violence, Ecuadorians will head to the polls Sunday to choose between two starkly different futures: the continuation of a brash, business-minded president, Noboa, or return to a leftist fold led by attorney Gonzalez, who has made overtures to President Maduro. You see, now you get the difference here. I'm sure people on one side of the political spectrum in this country are going to go, Maduro's a terrorist. And, even though a narco-terrorist, even though your government happily works with Colombia that exports the vast majority of cocaine, but cares when Maduro does it, though, even though arguably not even doing it when they point at it. Overall, the point is it's the same conversation. Whatever you think of Maduro, he has been elected by the popular vote, which has been proven by many different election observers, even American ones, even U.S. allies, and they just don't like the outcome for obvious reasons. And the same thing will happen here. If that's the reality of this, or whether they manipulate it to make him win. The point is that they will manipulate whatever they can to get the outcome they want because their national security supersedes everything. Very Israeli. The runoff election marks yet another chapter in the country's struggle against a surge of violent crime that has engulfed cities. Does this sound very familiar to you? That was once a popular tourist destination. This seems manufactured, and I don't even mean fake. I'm very much of the mind that a lot of this is happening in these places because it's being driven to happen, whether through intelligence or just weaponized migration. That's not, let's be clear. That is happening, and you can straight up prove it. And whether that's the full picture, that's for you to decide. Maybe 1%, maybe, but it is happening. I think it's a lot more than that. And so now you've got these places that are being overrun by a problem that the U.S. steps in to solve, sort of like a problem reaction solution situation. Now, just to go through, I'll come back to this if there's more. So just simply asking Brave, is there any connection between Israel and Daniel Noboa? Daniel Noboa has a notable connection with Israel, particularly through his vice president, Rojas, last name Rojas, Veronica Rojas. In 2023, Noboa appointed Rojas as a peace collaborator between Israel and the Palestinians. And we know how that's been working out. She's doing a great job. A mission she was to carry out from the embassy in Tel Aviv. Almost like they have somebody that's supposed to be the vice president who works out of Israel. Not almost like, seems like that's what's going on. Rojas was later sent to Israel weeks after diplomats were being evacuated after October 7th. That seem weird? It should. Noboa has also received intelligence and security cooperation from the CIA and the Mossad, one of Israel's intelligence agencies. Doesn't that seem weird? So you've literally got a CIA-supported, Mossad-supported puppet that sits in this presidency with a vice president that works out of Israel, but that's no big deal, right? All makes sense. Here's what Grok had to say. Adds a little bit more. In December 2023, Noboa announced that Israel would provide, guess what? Technical assistance to help Ecuador regain control of its prison systems. Uh-oh. Now we're seeing how this kind of folds in. He mentioned plans for Israel to aid in designing maximum security prisons and possibly using prison boats for high-risk inmates. Get ready for that to be folded in with this whole unconstitutional deportation scheme. During his 2023 presidential campaign, Noboa spoke of a pre-agreement with Israel for $830 million, 10-year, zero-interest project to enhance Ecuador's intelligence and border security, including training centers. This was part of the broader security agenda to combat organized crime. Oh, same thing Trump was saying with building prisons to house them when it's all centered around what Israel was doing. They're literally spending almost $1 billion to have Israel infiltrate their country, which is what they're going to do with that. Even if they do everything they want, Israel has been praised. You listen to their conversations, the intelligence side of Israeli government will infiltrate and cede everything they want in every country they're involved in. They boast about it. In this case, he's literally telling you a 10-year, almost $1 billion contract with zero interest to enhance their intelligence and border security and training centers. So you don't think that's the same thing happening in the United States? We know what's going on. border security, training with the police. This is not hard to see. It says critics, including some of voices on Twitter, and this is just opinions, have questioned Noboa's ties with Israel with unverified claims about hiring Israeli security firms or aligning too closely with their policies. But isn't that exactly what Grok just said is literally happening? So why are those unverified? The point is you can see this. It's not hard to recognize. Now, that doesn't necessarily prove it's all about that, but it does show you that there is obviously conflicting interests that have these. I mean, look, if you ever supported by the CIA and Mossad, I'm pretty sure today that shows you exactly what you think it shows you. And you know what they've been doing. This is not an opinion anymore. The history has become very clear. Now, also ask Grok about his, which one was this? Oh, there's one more point down here. And this is the same thing. In searching for more recent developments in the same question, it says, during his 2023 campaign and early presidency, Noboa expressed pro-Israel sentiments, notably condemning Hamas's October 2023 attack. Now, that's not a big bombshell. It's to show you which side he falls on, right? That he's siding with the oppressor. That's the reality. Now, Ecuador pitches U.S. military base and free trade deal to Trump allies. That's what we were just showing you before, but let's flesh it out a bit. It says Ecuadorian officials have told allies of U.S. President Trump that they are interested in hosting a U.S. military base in the South American country, according to two sources with direct knowledge of the matter. The officials also said they were interested in inking a free trade deal with the United States. This is not just an accident, guys. All of these things interact together. It says on Wednesday, Noboa announced a strategic alliance with Eric Prince. What do you know? A prominent Trump supporter of and founder of the controversial private military firm Blackwater, actually now known as Academy, to take on crime and narco-terrorism in the country of 17 million. Which I guarantee, in my opinion, at least, is not what that's actually focused on. But just quick side note, let's not forget, Eric Prince is verifiably overlapped with Israeli intelligence and is part of companies that they use him as sort of a token to allow them the foot in the door of the U.S. market. And let's not forget on top of that the evidence coming from their own reports shows you that in some cases, managers of development projects in the Israeli military and intelligence arms were encouraged to form their own companies, which then took over the military project. The article's in here where they're basically telling you that Israel Unit 8200, these are assets that start companies in foreign countries that are simply cutouts for their intelligence. They boast about it. Read it for yourself. So it's saying Noboa, the 37-year-old heir to one of the country's biggest business fortunes, which he's an oligarch is the point, has publicly argued for bringing foreign military bases to Ecuador because that's what the people want? Hardly. Take a look of what Ecuadorians, they do not want U.S. military occupation. Nobody wants that in the world other than oligarchs. It says the Ecuadorian legislature is in the early stages of a legislative process that could eliminate a constitutional ban on such facilities. See? So at the moment, they have a constitutional ban on allowing foreign bases. And the legislature is in the early stages with his leadership to stop that. I mean, going to add a central bank and, if this is not what the country wants, this is what the globalist, authoritarian, all of the things. This is what the growing world government entity wants, clearly. It says officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for instance, have traveled to Washington in recent weeks to pitch the Trump administration on a critical minerals deal between the two nations. I could bring up 7 articles about the Congo, DRC, showing you that Trump and the Israel, or rather specifically, that was just a slip because I'm talking about Trump. I mean, specifically the U.S. government, over many left-right administrations and Israel have been manipulating the Congo, the DRC in particular, for a long time. And that's like with Haiti. There's a reason they don't have elections because they don't care. They don't want them to because they get what they want from it right now. So they don't care about democracy or whatever they frame it as. Now you've got people there that's from the side that they were going, like, well, come take what you want. Put us in power. Officials in El Salvador, of course, governed by conservative President Bukele, who's about to fly to the United States, and they're all gushing over right now, Alex and all the rest of them. A prominent Trump ally have offered to host criminals deported from their jails. Like, this is all part of the same conversation. Ecuador's government recently selected Washington-based Mercury Public Affairs, this is where it gets even more interesting, to represent its interests in the Trump administration, according to a Monday filing with a Justice Department division that oversees foreign lobbying efforts. Let's read the rest of it. So we're going to go right into the idea of the Mercury Public Affairs. It says the filing outlined the lobbying contract does not include any reference to military bases. It does identify, quote, migration, trade, and security issues, including anti-terrorism efforts as potential areas of collaboration. Migration, trade, security issues, it's the same thing we're dealing with everywhere here. These are the buzz issues that are being used to roll out the Great Reset, in my opinion, and plenty of other things. It says the Ecuadorian Foreign Ministry and Mercury Public Affairs did not respond for comment. Ecuador is heading for a tight April 13th runoff. We'll see that probably tonight finish, or at least in the next couple of days. That will pit Noboa against Gonzalez, excuse me. Noboa has campaigned on what he says has been a 15% cut in violent deaths last year. And that's what's feigned, and for all we know, it's true. But this is why it's important. A reduction in prison violence and the capture of major gang leaders, all same things they're claiming. He has vowed to keep deploying the military in the streets and the prisons to fight insecurity. Okay, so maybe you want 15% cut in violent crime, but do you want to change it out for military occupation of your own country? Seems like it's already happening, or at least starting in this country. I mean, there's no question that these things are they're emulating a similar thing here. It seems like they all covet what Israel's got going on. Either way, that's not what we would support if we pretend anything we've always said this country is about is true. Now, it says the Noboa administration is also seeking to develop strategies alongside the State Department Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. That's the U.S. government. To, quote, fight narco-terrorism, according to Monday filing with Justice Department. Right, so all these different overlaps. He's literally saying we want to work with your State Department to fight narco-terrorism. That's the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. Which is very strange. And it says Gonzalez, 47, has expressed opposition. Like maybe we're building a new war on drugs, guys, in a different way. But it says Gonzalez, 47, has expressed opposition to the presence of foreign troops. That's the one that that's the left-leaning one that they're going to call, we'll see what happens. The point is she's the one saying we don't want foreign troops, which is what Ecuadorians seem to want. It says, while calling for more efforts to fight the drug trade-related crime that has rocked the country in recent years. So she's calling to fight the drug war, just not in the fake way they seem to be aiming at it. And it says she has pledged to pursue corrupt judges and prosecutors and roll out a social spending plan in the most violent areas. So funny how the same thing they seem to want to do here, she's claiming to do. The point is, they never really want that. Like we saw in Honduras, for example, with Prospera, they just removed half the judges and put the people they wanted there and acted like that was democracy. Same thing in this country where they're actually going after people, whether politically motivated or not, who are just doing what their job is. Again, whether they're using their political motivation to drive it or not, they still have the right to check what the president's doing is the right to bring it to a higher court. That's how it works. But they want to just remove them because this is what they're trying to do. And so she's the one saying, I want to get rid of the judges that are breaking the law. It seems like they like the way it works right now. At least that's the way I see it. Of course, you could argue she's doing the same thing Trump tries to do. It's all about how your perspective is. But I think the reality is you can see how this has continued. And it's obvious Noboa is the one working in their agenda. It says Trump has pledged to fight narcotics trafficking in Latin America, even though you understand the U.S. government has always been involved with the black market trafficking of these drugs, whether Afghanistan or Colombia. This is not even my opinion. They've been caught with drugs so many times. It's insane that we don't understand this. It says, and he has at times expressed an interest in expanding U.S. hard power. Yeah, might makes right. That's what they're doing. He has, for instance, threatened to invade Panama, floated acquiring Greenland, and said the U.S. could effectively take over Gaza. All of which are incredibly, I mean, I can't even believe we don't. The fact that they say these things out loud and there's people anywhere that would defend them, it really does blow my mind. Now, Mercury Public Affairs and the Israel connection. Mercury was hired by Q Cyber Technologies, an Israeli company linked to the NSO group. Who didn't see that coming? Known for its controversial spyware. Yeah, don't forget, Derek has covered this. Whitney has covered this. The reality is very obvious. Derek first covered this in 2024. Meet the spyware companies, more than one, preparing to unleash their tech during Trump's second term. That's going on. They're looking at you right now. You don't even. This is Israeli intelligence just scooping up your data. Trump and Elon scooping up your data. They're all profiting from your data. It's not about your rights. But that the NSO group, understand, has been caught. They're criminals. Israeli spyware firm NSO Group found liable for hacks of WhatsApp users. That's not the first time. So the Trump administration allowed this group to operate in the United States. That's happened. So recognize that when you see this and understand that the group that Noboa is working with to basically lobby the United States is an Israeli overlap company that helped the NSO group manipulate people, or rather they gaslit for what they represent the NSO group. And it says, known for its controversial spyware, Mercury's role involved, here's the point, managing public relations of this criminal group, lobbying in the United States and the UK to counter lawsuits against the criminal group, global backlash over allegations that the NSO spy software has been used to spy on dissidents, which it has been proven to do. That's in a court of law. So the point is, this group is basically working alongside Israeli criminal entities to hide what they're doing, at least in this case. The work highlights Mercury's involvement with Israeli tech firms facing international scrutiny. Pretty simple. So here, from January 10th, 2024, U.S. condemns attacks by armed groups in Ecuador, offers more cooperation. Let's move these out of the way. What this is about is showing you that Biden was doing the same thing. You can't see that by now watching the show. You must be missing everything. The point is that clearly the agendas continue that matter through both of them, through all of them. It's clear that this was already happening and now Trump's doing the same thing. And it says, the United States strongly condemns recent attacks, remember this is January 2024, by armed groups in Ecuador and pledged to increase cooperation with the government, the White House said on Wednesday, as violence escalated in the South American country. Inmates in Ecuador are holding more than 130 prison guards and other staff hostage in at least 5 prisons, while gunmen took over a TV station live on the air. So clearly this could have just been something that happened. But the point is this interesting overlap to this rationale of deploying American efforts, troops, intelligence to help fight the thing that so basically the overlap with the prison system, stopping the violent gangs and all this. It's very weird to me how much this overlaps. But, maybe it's just genuine coincidence. But I wanted to put it in front of you so you can see, one, that Biden was also supporting the same government, clearly, and for the same reasons. And now Trump is doing the same. And he's the one rolling out this whole foreign prison network system. It's very weird. This is not just El Salvador, remember. It's multiple places. Now, here's an interesting point. Libs of TikTok shares this. Boston nabs an illegal Ecuadorian with 20 sex crimes against children. Now, just to be clear, as always, Libs of TikTok are people like this, left and right, by the way. Do you think they checked any of this, or do you think they just saw what Christy Gremlin there, Kristi Noem, tweeted, or that ICE put this out? Now, yes, here's an ICE post, but you have to recognize this is just their statements as well as anything. Now, I'm not even denying this happened. I think it did. Just want to always point out that these people will just repeat whatever the government says while pretending to fight the government or the deep state. So the idea is, she says she blasts the Democrat mayor for sanctuary cities because that's where it goes. Which is, I argue, these Democrats are playing the counterbalance whether they know it or not. They're allowing things that are illegal, and that shouldn't be okay. Not just the sanctuary city, which is something that can exist without allowing illegal aliens to take advantage of it. The point is that there's supposed to be a dynamic in regard to people who are truly fleeing from things that our governments are doing and so on. But that's how this gets abused. And my same point is always, if they're here illegally, that's a crime. They should be charged with a crime. And if you're going to deport them or do any of that or charge them with a crime, you're required by law to present the evidence and let them see their accuser. And it's the same thing. Yes, constitutional rights apply. That is the reality. Now, back to this. This guy is a criminal, based on what they're showing you anyway. And I argue this is the case. What I think is interesting, 2 things. This guy, if what they're saying is correct, 20 sex crimes against, in some cases, children. So ask yourself this. You have a slam dunk case on a pedophile. Would you rather put him in prison for the rest of his life that he'll stay in the U.S. prison system, or send him to a foreign country where he will probably be able to work his way out, whether through bribery, which, by the way, exists here too. But just ask yourself that. If the whole point is actually holding people accountable for these crimes, put him in prison. It would be a slam dunk. It would be done instantaneously because the evidence is overwhelming. Because you can read this. It goes back a long time. Apparently, he was in the country. He got kicked out, and he came back. And one of the claims they make is that he came back in and wasn't checked at all, but it says that they don't know where he came in and what year he came in. It's like, so you don't know how or when he came in, but somehow he wasn't checked? Explain that for me. The point is that if they cared about this and it wasn't some political game, this guy would be in prison already. Like the other leader of the gang that they had been investigating for way longer than this whole agenda started. and they just yanked the case away and said, deport him instead. Why would you do that? I argue because you were trying to muddy the completely innocent field of people you sent over there with this one criminal you can prove. Either way, this person should be put in prison. How much you want to bet if he gets sent to somewhere else, he'll probably end up back in this country at some point. But that's an interesting point. Now, the other point is about the way that basically going after this person and whether he does get deported. Because I don't know, as far as I can tell, that hasn't happened yet. I simply asked in general on Grok to see if it said that, and it said, well, right now, he was arrested on April 1st for being without valid documentation. He faces over 20 charges related to sex crimes against a minor. So this guy, if that is accurate, it appears to be, he's a very disgusting and bad person. Rape and all sorts of stuff. Currently, he's in ICE custody pending immigration proceedings, which could lead to deportation, is what it says. So I just want to keep an eye on this story. I think it'll be very revealing if he doesn't get deported, right? Which, I mean, my case is I do think that would even make more sense because if just hold him accountable, make sure he's in prison for the rest of his life. But from the political side of it, if they're literally deporting people who are no criminal record here legally, which is a huge portion of the conversation, just because they speak out about Israel or go to a protest, and then they don't deport this guy, that would say a lot. So let's wait and see what happens. But I just want to point that out, guys. It's important to see that there are very clear overlaps to a lot of this. There are criminals out there that do deserve to get arrested, charged with crimes, and deported. Even those criminals, though, if deported without due process, is still a violation of the law. It's the same with the free speech. If you don't protect the worst of speech, you don't believe in free speech. If you start pretending where there's a line, then you believe in a limited portion of that. And really, you don't believe in inherent rights. Now, a few points on the way out the door. Tomorrow, talking more about this conversation, about the overlap of that continuing into the immigration, Khalil, Garcia, plenty of others. Just wanted to highlight this. He says he won't deport illegal immigrants employed in agriculture, hospitality, and other industries. Not a broad stroke, I don't think, but certain groups that are, basically, I'm going to bet his hotels, his restaurants, people, the oligarchs he works around, farm, large agricultural industries that they need, GMOs probably. I mean, my opinion. But understand that regardless, it is wild hypocrisy. I mean, if the argument is that this is the problem is immigration and illegal immigrants, which is predominantly what happens in these industries. I worked in kitchens for my entire life until I started this. I mean, that's all you get half the time. People that are coming in, dishwasher. I mean, so he's basically giving a pass to exactly what they claim they're fighting while going after people who are in fact here legally who just spoke out about Israel. And I simply said, just gets more clear by the day. This is about one thing and one thing only. Trump DOJ flips off SCOTUS in brazen update. We'll go in tomorrow. The point is about Garcia. They came back yet again. If you're following the show as I've done on this, this is like the third. They came back again after the Supreme Court was frustrated. Said, look, we told you to come back with steps. They came back and said, we don't have anything. So she'd come back with what is going on. What material steps have you taken? Because we've ordered you to bring them back. And they basically came back and said, no, or we're not going to do it. I mean, it's insane. And this is Trump who just said before this that he would abide by what they said. And now he's like, never mind. Nothing means everything. Everything means nothing. It's rampant lawlessness. And that trickles down. And by the way, here's what he said. Looking forward to seeing President Bukele, the guy who's going to fly here, who could totally bring back Garcia for no reason. And all you have to do is say, send him back. Like, no one's arguing Bukele's refusing. He hasn't even asked. If he simply said, bring him back, or even said, we're not going to keep paying you for him, is what the point is, it would come back. They're playing a very dangerous game, and they're playing with this man's life. And they have told you he's innocent. They have told you it was an error. Or I shouldn't say they're claiming because he has traffic tickets or because the insinuation that is a lie that he's a part of a gang and somehow means he's a criminal. They've already admitted through court documents, not publicly, that is not the case. He's not part of the gang. He is not a human trafficker. They've made these claims about him. I mean, guys, that in and of itself is a crime. That's libel. Like, these aren't true. You can prove it. Same with the gay barber. Same with most of these people. I've gone over 10 examples. I mean, Khalil is an obvious one. He had a green card. He didn't break the law. They admitted that. Rubio's own document admitted that. And yet you still got people like Kennedy in Congress literally saying he supports Hamas and he's a violent criminal. I just can't even believe it. I called him a clown. I said, that's insane. Like, that's not even they are claiming that. And most of you are out there screaming lies. We'll go over it more tomorrow. But he said, looking forward to seeing you on Monday. That's tomorrow. Our nations are working closely together to eradicate terrorist organizations. That's what he's claiming. And build a future of prosperity. President Bukele has graciously accepted into his nation's custody some of the most violent alien enemies in the world. You realize that not a single one of them has even been verified to actually be part of the gangs. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me. I find it hard to believe they wouldn't have one. But if they have yet to prove one, because none of them are given due process, and we've already seen countless cases of people that are not part of the gang and are not criminals, and we're here legally, what do you think is going on here? Now realize the larger point, guys, is whether or not you understand the reality that, yes, even illegal immigrants have constitutional rights, it is a fundamental fact. The point, the justification for why, if you don't understand it, one of them anyway, you have to understand that if a power structure can just go, you're an alien, you're kicked out without any verification, they can do that to anybody. And you go, oh, whoops, I guess he was actually an American. Too bad, now he's over there. It's in principle, it's the same exact thing. So why wouldn't you demand that they actually prove their claims like we always pretend is necessity? Absolute. Because you have a political motive for those out there saying that. Now it says these barbarians are now in the sole custody of El Salvador. You know, he says this after he just admitted that guy was sent by mistake. And it's not one, there's a whole lot of them. The point is he called them barbarians, even though he knows that guy is not a criminal. And it goes, and proud and sovereign nation. Oh, you mean the nation that basically violated its own constitution, its own courts, and basically set up these concentration camps. And like, they violated their own constitution to make a lot of what this is happening. This is an authoritarian state. It's been called out by human rights groups, just like all the rest they support, Saudi Arabia and Israel. Are you getting the picture yet? Do you not see what not just Trump, as much as the liberals would love to make that case, it's our government, guys. It's the U.S. government that is actively, I mean, you could even argue they're the reason it's all happening. I kind of see it differently, but either way, they are not on the side of freedom here. They are not on the side of anything we claim this country represents. They will never threaten or menace our citizens again. Right. All these innocent people who are here legally with no criminal record. Right. Like the woman arrested on the street from Tufts University, a PhD student, because she literally wrote an article about Israel that was simply saying they're committing genocide. It wasn't even hyperbolic. You saw the video. They didn't identify themselves. They didn't present a warrant. And realize, again, legally here. So if you're going to dispute illegal immigrants, you have to realize that, which you're wrong, by the way, but especially green card holders or Visa card holders, they're obviously, and they didn't even identify themselves. No warrant. She's gone. Now, overlapping points to leave out just in general that I wanted you to see about Iran. Iran Observer says this. Iran has proposed to the United States a nuclear-free Middle East, including a completely denuclearized Israel. Now, it's important to understand this. This has been proposed by Iran every time this comes around. It goes back a long time. Every time they make the argument, look, we'll denuclearize. I've even brought this up on the show before. We've talked to other nations in the Middle East, and we will completely, most of them don't have, but we will stop even our civilian nuclear program. Because remember, their point is they claim they don't have any, which the evidence backs up, even according to State Department, but who knows what they're hiding. And they say, well, everybody, but also Israel. You know, the group that pretends they don't have any nuclear weapons, but yet Israel refuses, and so they don't do it. Like, if Israel actually didn't have any, which everyone knows they do, why wouldn't you just go, yeah, sure, do it? Because they're going to accuse them of lying anyway. Why wouldn't you go, yeah, go ahead, do it. Take the steps so we can call you out. No, they go, no, you're a liar. And then the U.S. doubles down because Israel says so. And so nothing happens. It's every time. This is proposed every time by Iran and usually supported by the vast majority of the surrounding nations. And every time the U.S. refuses because Israel says so. Even though they totally don't have nuclear arsenals, and saying otherwise means you hate Jews, of course, obviously. I mean, it's just so stupid. So, of course, the argument, well, the Middle East countries are liars and they're evil Muslim terrorists. Okay, fine. Let's even say that's true. Wouldn't you then go ahead and do it then and we'll prove you wrong? Like, there's no downside to just going, yeah, go ahead. It's so obvious. And every single time this happens, it's because Israel is nuclear armed and they very clearly do. And it goes back to the Dimona nuclear testing area where what JFK was going to call out. Same with making AIPAC register as a foreign agent. And they died. Neither happened. And then here we are. Kawak Almasian points out, do you support a nuclear-free Middle East? Now, he does a good video you should watch, only 2 minutes, 46 seconds, where he basically makes the point about that, which I see coming. Hopefully not, but that ultimately it seems that both Trump or whether is United States and Israel are deliberately driving Iran to logically, by default, have to start seeking a nuke because they're making the situation so dire where it seems like they have to. Sort of like the North Korea point, or also like Gaddafi, who did disarm in a nuclear fashion, and then they raped him. He got raped to death in the streets. That's what happened with a gun. That's what happens when you follow the direction of the U.S. government, right? So he's making the argument here that this is it's spiraling. That ultimately Iran wouldn't be doing this if they weren't being forced into a corner by the U.S. government and Israel. Now, I'm on the fence because I know I've seen the same points about the officials who have said that we may have to do this, or we now want to because of what they are doing, even though we agree it's against our religion. But I also see the points where some push back on that and say that's not going to happen. So it's like Lindsey Graham point. Like, just because politicians speak up doesn't mean that's what's actually going to happen. But I understand the logic, and I'm not dismissing that. It seems likely almost. And if they inevitably start doing that, U.S. Israel are going to say, see, we told you it's always been going on, and we know it hasn't. Even their State Department has said so. Just recognize they're driving this into reality, which is going to cause death and suffering like they always do. And they'll blame everybody else. Douglas McGregor points out a valid point. Historical amnesia can kill us in the Middle East. He says, who today remembers the Iraq War that began in 2003? Who remembers that the American military intervention was justified on the utterly false grounds that Saddam Hussein's regime was secretly rebuilding the chemicals and nuclear weapons programs? Yeah, they lied about all that, right? Or what about babies in incubators? What about every other lie they've ever put out, which we can prove they manufactured? Babies in incubators was the actual daughter of the ambassador to was the country blanking. It was the ally of the United States. You could look this up on Wikipedia. And she cried and said babies, and it was a complete lie. Imagine that. You can get a young child to go up there and perform. Just think about what else they're willing to do. So here we are where they're literally driving people into fight, and they're trying to get everyone to denuclearize. Israel refuses, and that's why this is continuing. On last few points, Elon Musk says Starlink is now in Somalia. That makes sense, right? The same Somalia that's riddled with war, and that ultimately the U.S. government's trying to get one side to succeed for their benefits, like everywhere else. Mario Nawfal, of course, goes, yay, Somalia, grand nation, whatever Elon said. Here's the point. I keep saying this. Do not miss that every single time this happens, it is about war. That's what this is. This is an intelligence over. This is when they deploy the Starlink element. It's not because people, yes, it can be used for other things, like everything can. But you do not miss that every time we get one of these announcements, it just so happens to be the overlap to an ongoing warfare dynamic, like in Israel, like in Ukraine, like in Somalia, like everywhere. So this is them showing what they're really doing by pretending they're helping the Somali people when what they're doing is supporting the people that are willing to do whatever they're asked, regardless of how immoral, how illegal, as long as they get support by the U.S. government. It's the same reason they've been funding the worst elements of Islam for decades. Well, then you get the ridiculous loomers of the world that say that's the problem while ignoring that the Israel and the U.S. have been funding those groups, like Hamas, because they use it as a justification. And the alternative in most cases are people that, whether good or bad, are not willing to bow to whatever they want at the expense of everybody else. And so they go with the worst of the worst. Look around the world. It's amazing we can't be honest about this. And then back to the larger point about deploying all of these things, like whether Starlink or whatever satellites, all around the world for a largest spy satellite network from Biden to Trump to your front door. And of course, lastly, Elon Musk says Grok voice works great for telling children's stories and answering their questions. Welcome to the future. Let his weirdo XAI DARPA program convince your children that Israel's committing a good thing. That's where this seems to be going for me. God forbid you let Grok tell stories to your child for any reason. Anybody, if this was a Democrat making this point, you guys would lose your minds. But it's all good because he's on your side, right? Hopefully we're smarter than that today. Thank you for tuning in today, guys. I will see you tomorrow. My plan is to get this out as early as possible, but as always, things can happen. But my plan is to show tomorrow earlier on the side because I want to jump right into the the immigration overlap. That'll be the focus, I think, unless something larger happens tomorrow. But Plenty more coming your way, guys. I'm going to be having Robert on for discussion to get caught up again. In a larger sense, my aim, as I've told you from the moment we kind of pulled back a little bit due to a lot of stuff, is that I want to get back to where we were with Robert writing as much as possible, get Taylor doing interviews again, like just get this back on track. The point is we got shot, what's the right analogy? Just with the lawsuits and the funds that we've lost because of it. We had to take steps back, but most of you know that. I've been telling you along the way. My point is that I'm motivated to get back. Jason Bassler doing clips, Brock as well, continue to go back in that direction. That is where we're aimed at for sure. So I'm going to have Robert back on to get kind of caught up with what he's seeing in the world. Just, look, obviously your support helps that happen. But I will, and I keep saying this, but I want to make more, I don't want to do it at the end of the show, and I want to talk about it in a fleshed out conversation. But we have had a really positive update on the main lawsuit that was coming after us. Remember, there were 4 basically served, what do they call it, being served with papers. One has gone all the way to court, which you can look up on the docket, at least, maybe not now since it's over technically. But the other 3, based on what just happened with this first one, seem to have kind of stalled out. So we'll see. But what's important is that I think we had a very successful pushback, and because you guys were there for us. And I think and I'll go into it, but long story short is we still paid out well over $50,000, or in the process of doing. My lawyer is amazing and he's letting me do it slowly. But the point was they failed, despite the fact that I still had to pay, which you could argue was still a win for them. The law, they effectively, we basically said, well, I think I've mentioned this, but I would think $1,200 was the total. And what's insane is they spent probably over $100,000 to squeeze $1,000 from me. And it definitely felt like a vindication. But the problem is that not everybody has a great lawyer to work with or that much money to spend out to push back on a broken system. But even my lawyer argues that this very well could be a precedent-setting dynamic. Our case, because of you, could set a precedent that stops this kind of thing from happening, or at least gives a stepping stone for other lawyers to fight back. Because everything I did, even my lawyer was like, we can't do that. That's crazy. And now looking back, he's like, you did like this, what we decided to do, which nobody expected, very well can change this for everybody else. So thank you for supporting us, because we wouldn't have been able to do it without you. But now I will go into that in more depth. I want to have a full conversation about it, because it's powerful to think about. And even my lawyer argues this could be something that changes the way this works. And I think that's incredible. So thank you for everything you've always done for us. And thank you for supporting TLAV. Please get the information out there, more clips, talk to friends about it. You're making a difference. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.